Hey, before you watch this video, I just kind of wanted to issue a little bit of a warning. I am well aware that Steven Universe is a show for children. However, I am not a child, I am an adult, and I do say some bad words, some swear words in this video. If that offends you, and if you're not, cool with that, I would recommend turning this video off. I say a lot of, bad words that, kids shouldn't be hearing. So, if you're a parent, if you're a kid watching this video, please be aware of that. And please realize, yes, I am an adult, a man-child, if you will, talking about Steven Universe and ranking every single episode. And bad words exist, and I say them. So please, don't get mad at me. Don't watch this video if that bothers you. But if it doesn't bother you, let's go. Hello, everybody. I'm SDS Man, and many of you know I like a lot of things in life, including cartoons, and specifically including Steven Universe. It's a show that means a lot to me. It affected me so much as a person, kind of forcing me to be emotionally honest with myself, maybe sort of acknowledging sort of toxic traits within myself. I could really go into that, but that's not what we're doing today. My point is I just really love Steven Universe. It is one of my favorite shows of all time. It is on the magnitude of Avatar: The Last Airbender and Gravity Falls in terms of like cartoons that I really, really like. It has affected me a lot, and it's ending. I'm a little sad. Can you blame me? I'm a sad guy. But seriously, I really actually do love Steven Universe quite a bit. So I decided to rank every single episode. The original series is not including the movie. This is not including Steven Universe Future. Instead, it is including all of the episodes from Steven Universe, from this first episode, Gem Glow, to the last episode, Change Your Mind. I'm going to rank every single one of them from my least favorite to my favorite and sort of talk about them. Steven Universe, I love it a lot, but it isn't without its flaws and even not great episodes. So we're going to be doing that right here. Here are all of my Steven Universe episodes ranked. I would be lying if I said I didn't spend all night ranking these, like an entire night. Please like my stuff. Enough self-promotion, enough begging. Let's get into it. Here's my Steven Universe rankings. We are starting with Future Boy Zoltron, my least favorite episode in the entire series. I don't like this episode at all. I not only think it's sort of filler that really isn't necessary, I just don't think it really builds on any character development, especially with Mr. Smiley. I don't really like the sort of how it deals with duality of happiness and sadness, as if it's like, it almost feels like un-Steven Universe, like, in which it's like, the message here is really unclear. Like, is it saying like sadness can't be cured, or is it saying that positivity outweighs negativity? I don't really know what the messages are here, but this episode really has no value to me. I don't even think it's really that funny. Whenever I am watching the show, when I get to this episode, I'm always really tempted to skip it, but I'm usually watching it with someone, so I have to watch every episode, and this one is easily my least favorite. I don't like this one. Next, we have Onion Gang, which is only a couple episodes after Future Boy Zoltron, and these two we're competing for my last place spot, but I gave it to Future Boy Zoltron because at least Onion Gang, I think, maybe has like one funny moment. Onion is a character I've actually never really understood in Steven Universe. Like, I don't really understand the point of him. There's many citizens that I think are really fleshed out, even some of the minor ones, but Onion just kind of doesn't really have a character, and he's kind of there for comic relief, and sometimes it works in like bits, but when they have a whole episode just about Onion and his friends, maybe there's a few cute moments, but again, this episode really doesn't seem to have any big character development, any big meanings or themes, and it's just kind of boring. This episode is probably the most boring Steven Universe episode. It just kind of exists, and I don't like it. Next, we have Ronaldo, and baby, you thought I didn't like Onion. Let me tell you about this fucking name, Ronaldo. Actually, I don't really hate Ronaldo like everyone else does, but kind of like Onion, I think Ronaldo works in bits. Like, they'll do a bit with Ronaldo, and I think it'll be funny. There are many actually moments in the show where I think Ronaldo is really good. And there's one Ronaldo episode I actually kind of like, and I'll talk more about that later, obviously. But Ronaldo is terrible. Again, no character development. Ronaldo just kind of joins the Crystal Gems and is like, boop, 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 I'm annoying and funny, and I'm going to annoy you guys. Isn't this a funny show? And I'm just like, fuck, man. Like, it's so boring. I don't like it. Skip this episode. This episode is it's competing with the other two, actually. I really do not like this episode whatsoever. And y'all thought I wouldn't have back-to-back Ronaldo episodes. Yeah, this one, also one I'm not a huge fan of. I think it's better than Ronaldo in that it actually has some sort of... it has a creative gimmick in that it's sort of like in a POV camera perspective. Like, he's making a documentary for his blog. I just knocked over all my shit, but that's fine. Like, he's making a documentary for his blog. So at least it has, like, that creative aspect to it. And I think it has actually some funny moments, unlike with Ronaldo. But Rising Tides and Crashing Skies, it doesn't really add much character development. It doesn't really add much to the show, and I don't really find it necessary. I don't hate filler episodes, as we'll get to later, as if they have a purpose, if they flesh out a character or explore even a dynamic of a character or a relationship of character or / characters. But this episode just kind of exists, and it's kind of meant to be funny, and it doesn't really work for me. Buddy's book is boring. Boring episode. This is probably one of the least memorable episodes. Like, it's bad. I think it's pretty bad. But I also think it's just kind of boring. Like, honestly, I kind of forget this episode exists, and that's not a good sign. It doesn't really flesh out much. It does kind of maybe explain a few things from the past, but it just doesn't... It's really not well placed. It really comes at a time where I don't think the show needed it, and it doesn't really, again, add any sort of thematic purpose. And plus, it's just boring. Like, nothing happens in this episode. Like, really, it just kind of fleshes out a character that isn't even really important. I mean, I guess it kind of touches on Rose a little bit, but not even to the point of any intrigue or any development. Yeah, it's just very boring. Serious Steven. It's the first really early episode here, and I have a lot of problems with the early episodes. I talked about this before. I think the first couple episodes, the first maybe 20 or 25 episodes of Steven Universe range from very mediocre to not very good, and this is one of them. Serious Steven, it kind of comes after Cheeseburger Backpack in episode order, and it just kind of feels like it's that again, but not as good, I guess, and it's just kind of like, I don't know. It doesn't really deal with any character development. We really don't get to see any really cool things on this adventure that we go on, and it really doesn't flesh out any important themes of the show. It just kind of feels like an episode that they needed to have in the beginning of the show to sort of flesh out the show and to get it going. I don't like this episode whatsoever. Next we have Together Breakfast, and what I will say is Together Breakfast has a little bit more humor than Serious Steven. It is a little more thematically connected, and we do actually kind of explore the temple, which is something we hadn't seen before, so I do appreciate it for that, but that's about it. This episode really doesn't do it for me. It doesn't really bring any of the characters together. It does explore their relationships a little bit, but not enough. I feel like this episode really could have explored Steven's relationship with each of the gems and each of the gems' relationship with each other, but there are episodes way further on in this series that do a way better job than this, and Together Breakfast isn't one of them. Cheeseburger Backpack. I will say I like this episode better than Serious Steven, just sort of it kind of having a similar structure. But I mean, this episode again, I'm not really a huge fan of. It just kind of drags. It doesn't really add anything. It just sort of is an adventure in which Steven goes on the Crystal Gems and he has a backpack and he goofs around and he kind of solves problems, and it's sometimes funny, but it doesn't, again, I guess it introduces the characters, but it doesn't really flesh them out or make them seem interesting at this point, and it's just too early in the show to really be an episode I care about, so not a huge fan of this one. Dewey Wins. This is actually another newer episode. This is a newer episode. I don't really like Dewey Wins. My big problem with it is it starts this Steven and Connie conflict, which I know a lot of people have a problem with, and I don't have a huge problem with. Per se, my big problem with it is they don't really explore it. It's just kind of like, oh, Connie's mad at Steven. You want to learn more about that? We're going to have to hold that off, guys. Sorry. You want interesting character relationship and character development? How about we have an episode about Mary Dewey? And it just feels really, it feels really misplaced. And by the end, I guess Steven, through Dewey, learns how Connie feels about him and feels how he betrayed her. I can kind of see that connection, sort of, but it just feels like this episode really doesn't have a purpose, and it almost like starts off in a way where we might explore Steven and Connie's relationship, but then we just kind of avoid it and have this Dewey episode, and it's just very boring. Love letters. I don't like this one. Jamie is another character that maybe in certain bits can be funny, but a whole episode about Jamie, something I'm not really interested in. Him having a crush on Garnet, it just feels very derivative. It kind of feels almost like unnecessary. It's like, do we really need to explore this? And I mean, Garnet does have a really cool moment at the end where she has a heartfelt conversation with Jamie, but simultaneously it just feels like this episode really doesn't need to exist, and I could live without it. Restaurant wars. Two restaurants get mad at each other, and then they compete, and then they get along because of Steven. And like I was talking about earlier, Ronaldo does have a funny bit in this with like his girlfriend, where they set up like this fake love between Ronaldo and I believe it's Kiki. And then like his girlfriend finds out. It's a really funny moment, I will give it that. But that's about the only moment in the whole episode I really like. This just doesn't really feel necessary. It again is a filler episode that doesn't really necessarily flesh out any characters. It just kind of goes, hey, these restaurants used to hate each other, now they do again, and now it's fixed because of Steven. And it just really doesn't feel necessary, and I could really just live without this episode. We're back with another Onion episode, Onion Trade. And while again there's some funny moments that Onion has in this episode, again, no really character development here. We do explore this interesting object that can like duplicate items, but I don't know, it's just nothing happens here, and it just doesn't really feel interesting to me and doesn't really engage me. The only funny moment I can think of is this one moment where Onion literally like almost like launches a car at Garnet, and that's just a shot that and like animation I remember being really funny. But I don't know. It's just whatever. It's whatever. Shirt Club. It has a funny moment where Steven almost like assassinates Mayor Dewey, and it does, I guess, sort of explore some funny stuff with Buck, which, you know, is a character, I guess, but there's a little bit of character development here, so I'll give it that. That's why I ranked it above some of the other ones, but it still kind of feels like a derivative episode that really doesn't need to exist. Ah, yes. Ronaldo's back, baby, with Keep Beach City Weird. I will say, this at least is the first Ronaldo episode, like first really Ronaldo-focused episode, so I can kind of forgive it in some manner. My big problem with this episode is, yet again, character development doesn't really seem to be explored. It doesn't really have any emotional weight. It's kind of just a goofy episode with Ronaldo, and he's kind of goof, and it's like, isn't it funny? But because it's the first one, I kind of maybe excuse it a little bit more than the other ones. I can, like it has some funny moments, but it's whatever. Historical friction. Steven puts on a play with Jamie. And there's some funny bits with Pearl in it. That's really all I have to say about this episode. It's an episode I don't really like, and it just kind of exists, and Letters to Lars almost acts not necessarily as a recap episode, but to touch upon what all of these citizens of Beach City are doing to Lars. And it does actually have a little bit, again, of a focus on Dewey. Whatever. It has some fun, cute moments, but it doesn't really feel like a necessary episode, and it feels like something that maybe could have been tacked on to another episode. Like, I don't think we needed a whole episode to touch upon these characters. I just don't think it's really necessary, and I just don't think it really adds much to the show. So, not feeling this one either. The new Crystal Gems, I will admit, actually has some funny moments. I am the goddess. I will admit this episode does make me laugh at certain points, but yet again, kind of an episode with not too much character development, kind of an episode that maybe is sort of a breath of fresh air, and I will actually rank it a little higher of where it's placed because it comes after this arc in space, and they kind of do this like kind of cool down episode, so I'm all right with it. And it is kind of funny at points, but it doesn't feel necessary. And it's definitely my least favorite Lapis and Peridot episode, which are that character pairing is one of my favorites in the show. So it's a shame that this episode really doesn't utilize it that much. It just kind of feels like a filler episode, and that's okay, but it doesn't really, again, add anything, any character development. Escapism is actually by itself, I don't think, a terrible episode, but where it's placed is so bizarre. It comes during this Diamond arc, it's literally the next to last episode of the entire series. We're getting to this major event in the whole show, and then we have this episode where Steven kind of hangs out on the Watermelon Island, and that part is just okay. I mean, there's some cool stuff in there, but whatever. I think actually what makes this episode higher than so many others is it has an amazing song at the end. A song that I really, really love, and a scene I really love where Watermelon Steven is trying to like communicate to Bismuth and to Greg, and I actually really, really, really like that scene. But everything else before it just kind of feels Again, no real character development, but a really good song. I will give it that. Kiki's Pizza Delivery Service gets a little bit of credit because of its name, obviously, and allude to the film, the anime film, Kiki's Delivery Service. So I will actually give it points for that. I'm not lying, but yeah, it's okay. Again, Kiki actually has some character development, I guess, and so does Steven as he sort of like starts struggling to help people. This actually does introduce interesting sort of point in the show. Actually, Steven in his future is kind of like this, but maybe in a little bit of different context, where Steven is trying to help people, but it's really taking a toll on him. So I will admit that at least that concept is interesting. I just wish it was kind of utilized a little bit better. This episode is just okay. It's kind of forgettable as well. Secret Team. Shh. It's whatever. It's okay. I don't have anything to say. It's whatever. Cat Fingers is an episode that I think is kind of funny in some ways, and it does actually have one emotional moment, but it introduces a power, shape-shifting, which I think is an important one in the show. But yeah, this episode, it doesn't really do enough for me, but it's pretty good in terms of a filler episode and in terms of a funny episode, but that's all it really holds to it, so that's kind of why it's ranked pretty low. Dug Out is kind of, again, an episode not really with much character development. We do kind of explore Connie's dad, who is kind of a goofball, and I do appreciate that quite a bit. And I guess, it introduces the sort of Aquamarine and Topaz sort of mystery, which it's not really that great within itself, but it's sort of fascinating. But that's only a snippet, like literally the last shot or the last part really of this episode. The rest of it, while it does have some funny moments, and I of course always love a Steven and Connie episode, this doesn't really do it for me. It's whatever. Frybo, another early episode, has some funny moments. I guess we kind of flesh out some characters, but I don't know. Meh. Some funny moments, but it doesn't really hold too much on its own. I wouldn't really think of this episode by itself. Just more of an episode you kind of have to get through in the first couple episodes of the show. Now, Garnet's Universe is sort of a weird episode. This is a filler episode, and it's almost like Steven just kind of makes up a story with Garnet. And if that was it, then this would actually be ranked a lot lower. The reason why I have this ranked so high is because it has so many awesome references to like Dragon Ball Z and Gurren Lagann, and it's almost just like an anime like parody with Garnet, and I really can't fault it for that. It is very, very funny. Does it hold much weight on its own? No. Does it have any character development? No. Is it any significance of an episode? No. But an anime reference episode, yeah, I'll give it some sort of props, I guess. Your Mother and Mine is another sort of recap episode or a backstory episode in which Garnet explains sort of the whole story of Rose Quartz, which is obviously a big lie, as we learn a couple of episodes later. And this episode almost acts to remind us so that when we reveal the plot twist, it can sort of fall back to this episode and just remind everyone. Sort of like recap episode in a weird way. But I just don't think it really is necessary. There are some interesting moments with Garnet interacting with the off colors that I really, really like, and she kind of makes them uncomfortable, which makes a lot of sense, because her sort of way of like gushing over them to them is very taboo, and just doesn't. They're used to being sort of like criticized and like hated upon, so it's sort of like very unusual for them to where Garnet sort of uncomfortably praises their insecurities. So I do like that part. It's just a shame that's only like a snippet of the episode. Back to the Kindergarten is a very alright episode. I do love Peridot, so this is a reason why this episode is so high, at least compared to some of the other ones. I think in terms of quality, it's pretty low, but I think it is elevated by Peridot being Peridot and her having some funny moments. My biggest thing with this episode is it resolves sort of lame. It's like, oh, you can't grow away from the kindergarten, it's just a monster. And granted, Peridot does find happiness and does find some comfort in the end. But one thing I really don't like about this episode is Smoky Quartz just kind of shows up for a bit, and it just kind of feels a little bit unnecessary. I don't know. This episode is just very whatever. Room for Ruby is a funny episode. Ruby's kind of a dick. It's kind of funny. Really creepy moment at the end. And it's whatever. But I do like how Lapis actually lashes out on Ruby. Because Ruby is just like, oh, I like the earth so much. And Lapis is like, how could you do that? And sort of like Lapis's toxicity comes out of her, not necessarily insecurities, but out of her sort of PTSD / confused sort of mess of a person that she is. And I don't think it's, I know a lot of people don't like Lapis as a character, or at least have a lot of problems with Lapis, and I can see where that comes from. I don't think Lapis is necessarily a good person, or I wouldn't argue that she's not toxic, but I think her toxicity comes from a place of pain, and I like exploring that, and this episode doesn't do that as much as other episodes do, as we'll get to them later, but I do think this episode is alright in that regard, but outside of that, it's a whatever episode. The Question is a cute episode. We see Ruby sort of go on this fun little cowboy adventure and propose to Sapphire, which, if I said it didn't warm my heart, I would be lying. But a funny song, some funny moments, but it just doesn't really feel great to me. What am I trying to say? I don't know. It's a very standard episode for me. It doesn't really do much for me outside of a few moments. Watermelon Steven, again, kind of like The Question, a lot of funny moments in there, and maybe there's sort of one little cool moment at the end where one of the Watermelon Steven sacrifices themselves, but it does sort of introduce a cool concept with Steven Spit, but it doesn't really, again, add much in the terms of character development to our core characters, and that's what filler episodes should do, and this doesn't really do it, so it's okay. Tiger Philanthropist is not necessarily as, some people may be surprised how high this one is, because a lot of people really hate this episode, but I love Tiger Millionaire so much that sort of like a spin-off episode of it is alright in my book. Is it as good as Tiger Millionaire? Not even close. Is it really that good of an episode? It's average at best, but it does some funny things, and I like kind of revisiting it, even if it comes at a weird point in the show. It's like so many episodes after Tiger Millionaire, it's like sort of weird that they did a callback episode this late. You think they would do it kind of earlier, but it's okay. Maybe it's just because it builds off Tiger Millionaire, I have a little bit of a soft spot for it, but I kind of like it. Beach Party is a cute episode. Doesn't really have much character development, though. Just kind of has some moments where the Crystal Gems hanging out with the pizzas, and it's kind of, again, some really funny moments. But it doesn't really, again, add much to the show in terms of character development, and it just kind of is that, and that's it. Steven and the Stevens, some really funny songs, some really funny moments, really funny stuff, and exploring some pretty dark themes and like kind of fucked up shit. But again, it's a whatever episode. It's okay. It's a very average episode, I guess. Onion Friend. I don't think Onion's that interesting. The only reason this episode actually is higher than it really would be for any typical Onion episode is that we actually meet Vidalia, which is a character we don't see too much in Steven Universe, but I really, really like. And we start exploring Amethyst and Vidalia's like friendship. And there's one scene where this is going on during the moment where Garnet and Pearl are having a falling out because Pearl tricked Garnet into fusing with her to make Sardonyx. And there's this moment where Amethyst just kind of like vents. And Steven almost is like, he doesn't want to hang out with Onion, but he's like, I will stick through it because Amethyst is happy here. And that's a very heartfelt moment and is a moment that actually, like, when I first watched it, kind of made me emotional. And I really like that two relationship. That's the only thing carrying this episode, though, because anything else out of that, it's just very average at best. Lion 4. Alternate ending. Some cool stuff here. It's like Steven isn't like have a prophecy because that's not really like that's not real. Like he doesn't have this magical destiny, and exploring that is kind of interesting. But yeah, it doesn't really go deep like the other Lion episodes do, and it's okay. It's okay. Sadie Killer is an episode that I think, again, is okay. I love Sadie as a character. I think she grows a lot in the show, and we kind of explore her and her insecurities. And this is her sort of quitting her job, accepting it, and going after something she's passionate about. And maybe outside of that, it doesn't really have too much going for it. But I think that enough, and my interest in Sadie enough, can hold this episode to be an average episode. It's average. It's average. Open Book. It's a cute episode with Steven and Connie. There's some fun little moments. I like at the end how they kind of acknowledge how Steven likes the ending and Connie doesn't. And there's this line where Connie's like, well, of course you love it, Steven. Like, of course you do. And you love schmaltz. That's the line. And that line always cracks me up. And I love that scene between the two of them. But it's Rose's room. It kind of has some cool stuff going on. But again, outside of that, it's whatever. Pool Hopping is an episode that actually adds a lot of character to Garnet at this point in the show that doesn't involve around her being a fusion, but involves around her future vision, in which she sort of has to accept that Steven has grown up so much and has changed so much that she can't really predict the future anymore, and she's blinded to it, and she's sort of going out of her way so she doesn't have to acknowledge that and deal with that, and she has to have like an emotional moment at the end. Again, outside of that one scene, this episode is just whatever. Some funny moments, does feel a little bit misplaced. But it's okay. It's okay, and I really like that moment between Garnet and Steven at the end of the episode. So, and it has cats. It has cats. Put a cat in the episode. I'm gonna like it a little more if it didn't. All right. I'm sorry. I can't help myself. Kindergarten Kid is a Looney Tunes Steven Universe episode, and although it doesn't have the character development and thematic elements that would make a Steven Universe episode interesting, it's Looney Tunes, baby. It's funny. Paradox in it. That explains enough. Gemglow, the first episode of the show. As a pilot, I don't think this episode is that great. As a standalone episode, it's alright. Introduces the gems, has some funny moments, Cookie Cat, whatever. It's okay. House Guest is an episode in which Greg is kind of a dick, and that's something I really don't like about this episode, and I think they did a pretty poor job portraying him that way, because outside of this episode, he's not really an asshole in any sort of capacity, and it doesn't really make much sense that him, of all people, would do something kind of toxic just to get close with Steven. But they have a good moment with their song. I like their song a lot. I like that moment where Steven sort of struggles to have his healing powers because he's doubting himself because of Greg, and I do like some of the interactions. But it does, again, sort of feel like a weird episode that doesn't really... I don't really understand it in that regard. So it kind of balances out. And it's an average episode. I like The Big Show more than Sadie Killer, even though this is another episode just of a Sadie Band episode. But it does explore how Sadie wants to be separated from her mom. She wants this creative freedom, and I like exploring that. And of course, it's shot interesting, kind of like the Ronaldo episode. But unlike the Ronaldo episode, I actually think this episode actually has character development and fleshes out Sadie, which I like, and we explore more of her character and her relationship with her mom, which makes a lot of sense. Her mom is very overbearing and she kind of wants to escape that, but when she actually doesn't show up to her show, it kind of upsets her a little bit, and she goes, I wish she was there, because she obviously loves her mom and wants her to support her, but she also wants her to give her the space so she can express herself creatively without her mom breathing over her neck, and I really like that. And Greg has some good advice in this episode, and I think it's interesting. I think it's a fine filler episode. I think it's an alright filler episode, so I'll give it that. The Good Lars is also an alright filler episode. We actually see some interesting development between Sadie and Lars. We actually see them alone together for the first time because Steven's not there, and we kind of get some hints at their relationship and how they, have maybe messed around in the past, but they can't really seem to hold a stable relationship because they're just kind of too conflicting, and I kind of like that aspect, and I think seeing an episode from Lars' perspective is interesting. I like Lars a lot. Lars is probably next to Sadie, or equal with Sadie, one of my favorite human characters, also with Connie too, of course, but I like Lars a lot, or Townie characters, I should say. Lars and Sadie are my favorites, and I think Lars is a character in a lot of ways I relate to. I kind of actually used to be a lot like Lars back in the day, not necessarily in that not in all the ways, but I used to kind of be a little bit of a mean person to some people, or toxic to some people, because I wanted to hide my insecurities, just like how he hides his insecurities by kind of acting like a tough sort of cool guy and sort of not, but also acting like a dick. And I would be lying if I said I hadn't done that in my past. And I understand how Lars feels as a person. He's very insecure, and I understand that. And this episode kind of explores that a little bit with Steven, and everyone just kind of like, oh, Lars, hi Lars, how you doing? But obviously, whatever. This one's all right. This one's all right. It's okay. Know Your Fusion is a very, very fun episode. Very funny. I love Sardonyx. I love Smoky Quartz, so having an episode of them together is cool. A very meta episode, and in some ways that makes me like it, and in some ways sometimes it pulls me out of it. It's kind of a weird moment. It doesn't really stand alone, it stands alone and doesn't really add much to the story. It's an alright episode with some funny and cute moments. Laser Light Cannon, the second episode of the series, has a good moment at the end. It starts to really explore Rose as a character and hints at some big stuff going on, but yeah, it's alright. It's alright. I like the ending of the episode, and I think it does a good job of establishing some stuff establishing things that are important, and I think it's just an alright episode that is very feel good. Winter Forecast is also an okay episode. I do like the Steven and Connie interactions, and I do like how we sort of see Steven use the future vision power that Garner granted him to make some choices, and this is really wholesome scene at the end where while Steven's sleeping, Connie comes down and they both look at the snow together, and it's very heartfelt. Arcade Mania is a funny episode. There's also a game called Beat Meat Mania, and if you don't understand that joke, then I'm sorry for you. Gemcation is an episode I actually kind of relate to. I've had moments where I've been going through like an argument with someone I really, really cared about, like Steven did with Connie, and I would literally just sit at my phone and wait for them to text me and get really upset when they didn't and stuff like that. So I kind of relate to that, even if it's sort of not a positive or healthy way to deal with it. And having Steven sort of struggle with accepting that and accepting sort of the falling out or the appearance of a falling out between his friendship, whatever you want to call it, with Connie, I think is very interesting. So I actually think this episode does its job, and I think it does what it needs to do. And hey, it has a funny Ronaldo bit. I'll give it that. Fusion Cuisine is very fun because Steven doesn't really have a nuclear family, despite Connie telling her parents that he does, so he kind of has to make one up, and it is a very humorous situation, but also sort of explores that, hey, Steven doesn't have a traditional family, and that's okay, and that's a really good message to send to kids, so I actually really like that in that regard. So I gotta give it that, and it's a funny episode. A lot of people consider So Many Birthdays the first really good episode of Steven Universe, and although at the end Steven almost dies and it is kind of an emotional fucked up episode. I don't think this episode is amazing. It's funny. It has some really good moments. And it is what it is. A lot of people like this episode. I don't love it as much as everyone else does. But in a lot of ways, I can at least respect it. Appreciate it. Kind of both? I don't know. I like the message a lot. It's kind of an episode that fleshes out Greg. We got a cool Lapis scene at the end. Has some good songs in it. I like this one. Steven's line introduces Lion, of course. There are some funny moments. There's a little heartfelt moment at the end. And it's actually has one of a really cool animated sequence at the end, which I really like with the colors. So I got to give it that. It's pretty good. Chili Tids, and it's an alright episode. It's okay. There's a lot of funny moments. There's the one scene where Pearl's dreaming about Rose and reveals to be Greg, and that moment haunts me and is one of the funniest moments, I think, in the whole show. Like, really, whenever I see that moment, I always die laughing. And it does sort of have an episode where, a down episode where they kind of need to rest, and we start to see Steven have some of these cool dream powers, introduces that. And it's good. It's good in that regard. It's an episode that I find very funny. And it almost isn't necessarily a break. So that series is starting to really pick up at this point, and it is a kind of necessary break to all of that, and I can appreciate it for that. I really like Joyride, at least in its concept. Steven is sort of hanging out with a bunch of teenagers, and they're all kind of complaining about their lives, and Steven really needs to unwind, and he basically says, well, my mother's dead, and the Crystal Gems kind of blame me, and they put all this stress on me, and I kind of have to deal with it, and they're all just kind of like, wow, you really have it rough, kid. And there's this moment at the end where the Crystal Gems come up to Steven, and they're kind of giving a hard time, and the rest of them are like, you need to give this kid a fucking break. Like, you are kind of all fucked up to him. Like, you guys do not know how to parent, which is something I really like exploring, because at the beginning of the show, we think the Crystal Gems can do everything, but as the show goes on, we kind of learn there are things they're not really that good at, and parenting is one of them. In this episode, it's sort of like Steven really needs a break. Steven really needs to vent and just let everything out, and it is an episode where he kind of does that. And yeah, I think this episode's actually really important in terms of, exploring that. And now there's a cat behind me. Hey, buddy. Bye, buddy. Some may be surprised to see Kevin party up here, because, fuck Kevin. But I actually think this episode, hear me out, fleshes him out quite a bit. Like, all the other Kevin episodes were actually about Stevonnie. And in this one, instead of Kevin separating Steven and Connie or Stevonnie, he sort of brings them back together, and I really like that moment between the two of them, or between Steven and Kevin. Rather, I like their interactions here, and Kevin is sort of like acting like a jerk, and we see him not really have any friends because he treats everyone like garbage. But we also see a moment where he is like really venting to Steven, and we kind of learn that maybe his toxicity sort of led to a relationship that didn't work, and it's still kind of haunting him to this day. And it's like, whoa, we're giving Kevin some character? That's cool. And then we never see him again. But it's a fine episode. I actually kind of like it in some ways. I actually like Kevin in this episode in some ways, which I can't really say about any other episode. Political Power is an episode I really like because it is another episode where we explore the Crystal Gems are not as calm and collective, or don't know everything like we think they will, or we think they do, rather, when the show starts. We kind of see that they really don't know what the fuck they're doing in some ways, and we really start to see, there's one scene where they're all kind of like talking with each other, and they're all like, we really don't know what to do with, Peridot coming, or Homeworld coming down to us. It happened to be Jasper, Peridot, and Lapis. It's right before the big two-part episode where Garnet reveals she's a fusion. But there's a moments in this episode with Maya, Dewey, and Steven gotta have interactions, and I like those interactions. Also, I'm getting a cold, that's why I'm all fucked up, I'm sorry. But I actually do like those interactions, and I actually think this episode does a really good job of, again, exploring the Crystal Gems. And there's this moment where Steven kind of demands them to be honest, and they do, and they go, we really don't know what's going to happen. We really don't know what's going on. And again, that's one of the first times we see that in the show, where we thought these Crystal Gems, or Pearl, Amethyst, and Garnet, were they knew everything, knew what they were doing. They were so like well put together as a family, and it kind of starts to come undone in this episode, and I really like that. The zoo. I actually don't really love this episode that much. I'm actually surprised I even ranked it higher than Political Power. It's probably on the same level of it. I think it does introduce some interesting concepts, like rose quartz kind of being caregivers, even though we don't see that here. We see all the bubbled rose quartz, and kind of implies that they were the caregivers in the zoo, which makes a lot of sense. And I like that concept, and I like some of the concepts explored in this. But yeah, this episode's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Story for Steven is the first flashback episode, and although it is probably my least favorite because I don't think it deep explores necessarily Greg or Rose's relationship with their characters individually, but I think it does do a good job of sort of introducing us to them, introducing Marty, who's an important character in Greg's story at least, and then sort of exploring how they met. It's good to know. It's good to have. It's okay though. Like, it's not like an amazing flashback episode. I don't think it really adds a lot to the show. But I do like it I do like what it does in some regards. So I gotta give it some credit. So that's why it's here. Horror Club. Remember how I said there's one episode that I like that Ronaldo's in? This is that episode. I actually kind of do like this episode quite a bit. I think Ronaldo has a really cool interactions with Lars, and we kind of see like Lars again being sort of toxic and not really wanting to reveal his insecurities, so kind of acting like a tough, cool kid, and he just kind of like Lars, knock it off, be yourself, please. Which I relate to so much that, or at least like that, not anymore, but back in the day I kind of used to be like that in some ways, so I relate to it in a way. I don't relate to it in a positive way. I relate to it almost in a negative way. But I like that, and I like exploring how Lars is just kind of a jerk, and he cares too much about his image and cares too much about himself that sometimes he does toxic things to mask his insecurities, and I like exploring that. Plus, there's some funny moments in this, and the house comes alive, and it's a good like Halloween episode, so I'm down for it, baby. Raising the Barn is an episode, again, speaking of insecurities, kind of exploring Lapis's and her toxicities too, and how she wants to just run away because Homeworld is supposedly coming, and how Steven kind of tries to deal with that, and Peridot doesn't communicate it with Lapis because she's afraid Lapis is going to lash out at her, and exploring how their relationship maybe has some toxic problems with it. And I really like this episode. I think it does a good job of that, and it has an ending that maybe some people didn't really like, but I did, and I like kind of how it took Lapis in a direction, and you kind of almost feel bad for Peridot, and I think this episode just does a good job of exploring that dynamic. And yeah. We get introduced to Sugalite in this episode, Coach Steven, really the only episode with her, and Pearl has an amazing song, and in a way this is a Pearl episode, so you know what they say, if it's a Pearl episode, I like it. So I actually don't think this episode is like amazing, incredible. I think it's good. It kind of explores strength and weakness and what real strength is, and it has a cute little song about it, and it's funny, and yeah, it's a Pearl episode, so I'm always down for it. Storm in the Room is an episode that I think is really important. Steven sort of sees how much his or Connie's mom cares about her, and that sort of like hurts Steven. Doesn't really hurt Steven's feelings, but it kind of makes him, once again be like, I just wish I could just have a moment like that. I wish I knew what that felt like. So he tries to recreate it in Storm in the Room, or rather in Rose's room, in the episode Storm in the Room. And what happens is once he realizes it's all fake, he sort of has like a meltdown, and then he sort of starts to blame Rose Quartz for all sort of the mistakes she's done, all the things she's left on to Steven. Steven really cares about people and tries to fix their problems, but it has a toll on him. I mean, we see that in Steven Universe Future, but even throughout the regular series, it has a toll on him. It affects him. And we kind of start to see him sort of vent out that anger towards Rose in this episode, even if it's not really Rose. So I think in that regard, it's an interesting episode in fleshing out his relationship to Rose, Steven as a character once more, and how he sort of feels about Rose Quartz. I think it's an important episode, considering it's after we learned about how she shattered Pink Diamond and all this other stuff is coming out. So I think it's a very important episode. Are You My Dad is a pretty cute episode. We see Aquamarine, who I just adore in some ways, I guess. And we see Topaz, and it's kind of like this weird mystery going on, and why is everyone disappearing? And yeah, I think it does a good job. It's kind of a cute episode. It isn't amazing by itself. I think Storm in the Room actually probably has higher highs than this one and better character development. But I think this one really starts to ramp up stuff, and it starts to build up towards something that I really, really like, as we'll get to as we get in the higher episodes. So yeah. Are You My Dad? I really like Reformed. This is an episode that focuses on Amethyst and her insecurities. We see how she isn't really happy with how she looks. She isn't really happy with who she is as sort of a gem in her sort of, I guess you could say body dysmorphia, or at the very least her insecurities with herself. And in this case, her literal body, and how she reforms to, in some ways, to look like Pearl and to try to be stronger. And Garnet is trying to like tell her, no, you need to take your time. But in a way, that's sort of bothering Amethyst. She's getting compared to how Pearl reforms, and she has a hard time sort of accepting her for herself. And by the end of the episode, she does take her time to reform, and reforms how she should. And she gets love from the Crystal Gems. It's a very heartfelt moment. And it just fleshes out Amethyst some more. I really like this episode. Amethyst's big sort of character arc and character, I guess, theme, flaw, is that how she feels about herself, her insecurities, her problem with her self-worth, and her, I guess, in that relationship to her size and her body. And this is a way they sort of explore it, and I think it does a good job of doing that. Monster Buddies. It's a very cute episode. Steven tries to befriend Centipedal. He tries to heal him, or not, at the very least tries to befriend him. That's a different episode where they try to heal her. I'm sorry. Why did I say him? All the gems are female. Well, some of them are, whatever. Her. He tries to heal her, and it doesn't work. And that's a different episode. What am I thinking of? Sorry, I'm all over the place. This episode just befriends Centipede. Steven befriends Centipede. It's an alright episode. It's kind of sad at the end. I'm gonna stop talking. I'm just bumbling over myself. I'm a mess. 3 gems and a baby. It's kind of cute in some ways, and also kind of horrifying how the Crystal Gems are just like, hey, let's get Rose back, and sort of how they don't really understand humans and babies, and they're still at the point where they're kind of like, they're not really attached to Steven yet, and they just want Rose back, and they really don't know what to do, and Pearl's going through a crisis, so I like exploring that. Steven Floats. It's a cute episode. It's a cool concept. It has some really cool gags in it, and Steven has an important power and connects it to his emotions, and kind of starts to really look at himself, explore himself. It's good. I Am Your Mom is the episode following Are You My Dad? And I really like this episode because not only does Steven ultimately sacrifice himself in the end, we see some more of Lara's character as well, but I really like this revelation where Steven gave Peridot the list of humans, and that comes back. And I actually do remember watching that season 1, and I was wondering if I'd ever come back, and they brought it way back late, way further than you would think. Like, it happens here and you don't really expect the plot twist, so for that plot twist I really like that reveal. But besides that, yeah, the episode is just kind of like it's a series of events to get to the next 4 episodes, which obviously are going to be way higher on my list and are some of my favorites of the show, and it does a pretty good job. And I like Aquamarine. I'm sorry, she's sassy, and I can respect that. That will be all. Is the end of the Zoo arc, and it does have a pretty good, it has an alright song. I want to say pretty good, an alright song with Yellow and Blue Diamond, and them sort of exploring how Pink Diamond is gone and them dealing with that. And I can understand that. I can relate to that in some ways, and understand sort of the issues with that and their grief and how they deal with their grief. even if it sort of is, genocide. So I don't know, but at the very least, yeah, some cool moments. Finishes the arc, and it's a good episode. Lars and the Cool Kids, in my opinion, is a very underrated episode. I don't think it's amazing by any standard, but I think it's good. And it has one scene where Lars sort of is kind of this is a Lars episode, and Lars is like trying to act cooler on the Cool Kids, and it's kind of like not working because they're all kind of just like, he's faking it, and he's again hiding his insecurities. And at the very end, he sort of lashes out at Steven because of insecurities, and it sort of touches a nerve because he mentions Steven's mom, and Steven gets really upset, and he's like, how are you gonna talk shit about my mom? I didn't even know my mom. And it's like, whoa, it's a very sort of deep moment, and it's exploring Lars and Steven's relationship, and they have a little heartwarming moment at the end where they put their hands on each other's chests and they hug each other. It's great. I like this episode. Too Short to Ride, a Paradot episode focusing on her sort of insecurities, how Steven and Amethyst can shapeshift. She really feels inadequate as a gem because she feels like she doesn't have these powers. But she does ultimately turn out to have metal powers. But even beyond that point, it just kind of explores how Peridot has some insecurities about herself. Even though she, at one point in the show, sort of point out all the insecurities and all the problems with all the other gems around her, we kind of start to see her explore her own insecurities. And I like that. I like the new Lars quite a bit. In this episode, we see Lars kind of taking up baking, and he's kind of exploring a side of him that he's insecure about, and again, kind of clashes with the Cool Kids. And there's a moment where he gets invited to a potluck, and he's going to bring his little like creation, and Sadie and Steven are trying to support him and help him out as friends, like very, very good friends. And Lars almost like accepts it and starts to accept who he is, but last minute, he just can't deal with it. He's so insecure about how he is, and he's kind of like can never really be his true self and has to kind of be a jerk to deflect it. And we see by the end he threw away the I forgot what he made. Was it yam or something? I don't remember. But point is it's, yeah, I like this episode. I like Lars a lot, so I like this episode. Rose's Room, the first episode we kind of start to explore Rose's room. It kind of all goes crazy, which I really like. It's also a place where Steven can call his own. He feels like he has no space away from the crystal gems, and he finally has a place where he can sort of express himself, but he kind of does it in a way that starts to harm everything, and it's maybe not the most healthy outlet to deal with how he's feeling, and we kind of see that. And yeah, it's kind of a creepy episode, but it's a very solid episode. Bubble Buddies is an episode, even though it's early on, I'm actually surprised it's this high. There's just, Connie's introduced, and Steven sort of tries to help her out and tell her it's okay, and Connie reveals who she is as a character, and we flesh her out, and that's interesting. And there's this really heartfelt moment where she's like, I'm going to die with no friends, and Steven's like, hey, I can be your friend, and there's this very, emotional moment, and I respect it. So it's a good episode. It's fine. Even though I said the first couple episodes of the show I'm not a huge fan of, this is kind of an exception of it. Greg the Babysitter is another flashback episode, and it kind of fleshes out Rose a little bit more. We see how Rose still really doesn't understand how humans work, and we sort of see how she wouldn't really be ready to have a kid because she doesn't really understand kids. And in a way, we sort of see how she sort of looks at sour cream and understands sour cream, and can kind of see why she'd want to actually give herself up to birth a kid, why she would find that to be something that would make her happy. Even if this episode doesn't overtly explore that, I think it does a good job of at least hinting at that, and it's a pretty funny episode. I like Vidalia, so I have some Vidalia moments in here, and I just like having the past episodes, so I like it. Maid of Honor is the episode where Bismuth returns, and although I don't think it's an episode that is incredible, I do think seeing Bismuth come back, exploring how maybe she doesn't feel welcome and how she feels like maybe she kind of fucked up in a way, I think it's interesting that we kind of explore her interactions with Steven and even some of her insecurities. Although she does have a sort of a moment where she reunites with everyone and it's heartfelt. But yeah, this episode's good. It's good. Same Old World is a Lapis episode. We see Lapis sort of come back and sort of go through her backstory, which is one of sort of, again, tragedy. So to explore how she sees the world and her trying to sort of find a home and her struggling with really not having a home and Steven sort of helping her out. And I like the backstory. I like obviously the reference to Aladdin. I just think this episode's very wholesome. I like it quite a bit. Log date 7152 is a great episode. I think it really fleshes out Peridot as a character. We see her kind of come to accept Garnet as who she is, and Amethyst, and even Pearl. And I think it does a really good job of wrapping up her. It's like wrapping up her redemption. And I think it does a really good job of doing that. It fleshes her out quite a bit. I love Peridot, so of course I'm gonna like this episode. It's one of the funnier episodes as well. Her kind of understanding Earth, her kind of understanding the crystal gems, and I really like that. Steven's Birthday is an episode where we start to explore Steven's sort of insecurities, how he is sort of older than he looks, and how he may not grow normally, and how he thinks that may affect Connie's relationship with him, and how he deals with that in sort of an unhealthy manner by not talking about it, but just kind of faking it, and how that sort of affects him. And I think it's a very wholesome episode. I think it has some wholesome moments, especially between Steven and Connie. And Connie kind of comes out like the better person here, because she's like, I'll always be with you, Steven. Like, I accept you for who you are. And that's something I really like. Joking Victim, I think, is easily one of the most underrated episodes in the entire show. Another early episode, but we see, this is really the first episode where we start to explore Sadie's and Lars' relationship. Sadie basically is like, yeah, one day we hung out and played a game together, and I was his player too, aka they hooked up. So, and then we kind of see how Lars is kind of still this insecure jerk who around Steven, he won't be all lovey-dovey with Sadie because he, again, has almost like an image to protect, which is super toxic, and even around the cool kids. And we see how he lies to her and hurts her feelings, and she doesn't really know what they are, and she wants to know, and it's just, yeah. I like this episode. It is pretty complex. It has a very emotional moment at the end where Sadie opens up to Lars opens up to Sadie, and they both kind of talk a little bit, or at least accept where they are. And maybe they or won't they? I don't know. We'll see. I mean, we know, but we'll see. Drop Beat Dad it's a pretty good episode. Marty is in it. We kind of start to explore him. And it's a Sour Cream episode. And Sour Cream gets a lot of character development because we kind of learn his relationship with Marty. And we kind of, it's an episode I can see why a lot of people would relate to. Sort of a dad who doesn't really support their kid and just kind of wants to make it in the world and is willing to sort of ignore the emotional connection to their kids and kind of be selfish. And yeah, I really like that, and I think it does a good job of exploring that dynamic. And yeah, I like this episode. Adventures in Light Distortion is sort of an emotional episode, and near the end, basically Steven kind of feels like is really stressed about everything going on and about his dad being kidnapped. And we see while they're trying to get to the zoo that he kind of like almost fucks things up and they kind of disappear, and he almost like feels bad and feels like he's going to die and has a moment of sort of acceptance. But it's also a moment that we needed because Steven sort of comes to accept his feelings, accept his role, accept who he is, and accept his mistakes. And I think I really like this episode. It's very heartfelt. It's very emotional. And I think it actually is a pretty good episode in this arc. It really is probably the most fillery episode of the arc, but I think it's very necessary. Gem Drill is an episode I know a lot of people don't really like because they feel like it's an unsatisfying ending to the cluster. I tend to disagree with that. I really like how Steven uses his powers to connect to the cluster and force it to sort of get along with each other and sort of explore this like terrible forced fusion sort of thing. It's just it's so awful, and him sort of deal with that. A lot of moments between him and Peridot, he sort of has to do it by himself, and how he maybe deals with the issue may not seem like a great sort of conclusion, but I like it quite a bit. I know a lot of people do not like this episode. I've heard a lot of people complain that this episode, it just is like, oh, they're playing baseball and it's so dumb. But I actually have a pretty big soft spot for this episode. I think it's very funny. It's very cute. We kind of get used to the Rubies and they're all playing baseball. And it's kind of silly and dumb, but I think it has a lot of good moments. And we see Ruby and Sapphire sort of flirting and doing this fun stuff. And yeah, I think it's a very wholesome episode. I think it's one of the funnier episodes. I think it's a very solid episode. Is it had the most character development? No. Is it the most interesting and thematically sound episode? Of course not, but it's fun, and I had a lot of fun watching it, and I kind of like it. I'll admit it. Gem Heist is sort of like an interesting episode in that we kind of start to see Steven the Gem sort of break in, and Holly Blue and all these interactions and the Famethyst, and yeah, I this episode's cute. Some funny moments. The infiltration scene and the infiltration moments it's all funny, and yeah, it's I just like it. I think it's a very solid episode. Gem Harvest is an episode I actually really, really like, and in some ways it kind of seems like an episode that maybe isn't super, super necessary, but I think it actually is a really good cool down episode with sort of everything that's been going on, and it sort of explores the Crystal Gem's relationship to humans, and sort of, at least with Andy. And I actually think Andy is sort of a really representation of like a traditional character, and how non-traditional the Crystal Gems are, and how they sort of clash, but how they all learn to kind of get along together and see each other's point of view. And yeah, also one of the funnier episodes. I love one of the scenes where they're like, oh, let's celebrate all human holidays, and like Lapis hands Andy a grave and goes, sorry for your loss, or something, with like a gravestone, like rip Andy. It's funny. It's just a funny episode. It's a wholesome episode too. I like it quite a bit. Legs from Here to Homeworld may not be the perfect episode, and I do have problems with its pacing. It does move way faster. I feel like this episode should have been split off into 2 episodes maybe, but a lot of humorous scenes, a lot of heartfelt scenes, and we finally get to see some interaction with the diamonds, and that's really interesting. And we finally get to go to space, and we see White Diamond, and it's very creepy, and it's just like kind of like unsettling how like admissive White Diamond is of Steven's feelings. Like, she doesn't even really bat an eye, and yeah, I think it's a good episode. If not rushed, I will critique it for that, but I think it does some things right. I like Gem Hunt quite a bit. We kind of, another Steven and Connie episode, sort of exploring their relationship, and Connie's sort of first mission. A lot of cool interactions. Jasper kind of returns. I like it. Sadie's Song is, I think, a very underrated episode. This is an episode where we really start to explore Sadie's relationship with her mom, her insecurities, Sadie's insecurities, and how her mom and even Steven sort of force this thing upon her, really make her anxious, and really do some fucked up things, and really don't care about her feelings at all. And she kind of starts to vent and explore her relationship with her mom, which is a very complicated one, and one that I think is very interesting, and I like exploring it. Beach City Drift. Kevin's in this episode, but he's not really the star. It's Stevonnie, and how their fusion sort of doesn't work in this episode because of how Steven is just fueled by sort of anger and almost, I don't want to say hate, but he's fueled by negative emotions, and I like exploring that in this episode. So, it's okay. It's a good episode. And yeah, they drive a car. It's a fun one. And now I am going to take a break. I'm actually I just been recording for almost an hour and 40 minutes now, even if the editing doesn't seem like I have been. So I'm actually going to take a little bit of a break. I'm actually going to come back tomorrow or a couple days from now and finish the rest of these. So please ignore my outfit change and the lighting change and all that, but let's get on to the next episode. This next episode is Giant Woman. This is an episode from early season 1, and an episode from early season 1 that does still sort of stand out. I think by itself, this episode isn't amazing, but I kind of am a little, maybe not biased, but preferenced to my memories of this episode, especially when I first watched it. I think this episode, it introduces fusion, of course, which is such an integral part of the show, but not only that, it has a cute little musical number, and it really explores Pearl's and Amethyst's sort of character pairing a little bit more, and their character pairing is one of my favorites in the show, so I like exploring it. We see Opal for the first time. This episode is kind of like a major step in the show. When you first watch it, you kind of have a sense of like, whoa, like this is some important stuff right here. So I think on that alone is why I rank this episode so high, but I don't think this episode is incredible by itself, but I think it fits into the series well, and I just think I do think it's a good episode. I just don't think it's amazing, but like I said, I have an attachment to this episode, I should say. That's why I put it higher than maybe I would on another list, another sort of go at this. I don't know. Our next episode is We Need to Talk. This is my favorite of the Greg backstory episodes. It's our second one. Is kind of like also regarding the fusion, and it kind of explores how Greg attempted to fuse with Rose. I actually really like this episode. I like how the flashback starts off with doing a concert, and then we see Pearl fuse with Rose due to jealousy. Once again, kind of exploring Pearl's sort of toxic behavior in the past, and her jealousy, and her dislike towards Greg. I think that's very important. I also really like Rose in this episode. They do a really good job of it. I think this is the first episode that really fleshes her out. We did see her in another flashback episode before, but this one, we see how alien she really is, and how she really doesn't understand Greg's emotions, and she just looks at Greg as cute and funny, and her little like play thing, and then like by the end of the episode, she's like, oh, I really don't know anything about humans, and they have this really like genuine talk at the end. And there's a moment where Pearl at the end is like, I don't get it. Like, they didn't fuse. Why are they still dancing? Like, why are they still talking? And then Garnet's like, because they're in love. Like, that's you know, like, it really is. It's the relationship is very non-traditional or unorthodox, and they really explore that in this episode. And I really like that. This episode is very heartfelt. I like the song. I like. This episode's really good. I really like this episode quite a bit. Lion 2, the movie, is by some people that I've talked to who are also fans of Steven Universe, considered to be the first really great episode of the show. And maybe I wouldn't say it's the first great episode of the show, but I would say it's one of the first really good episodes of the show. Although I do have, I think, an episode before this ranked higher, or maybe I don't. I don't know. Oh, I do, yes. But besides the point, I do actually really like this episode quite a bit. We kind of start to see some lore stuff connected with Lion. It's a Steve and Connie episode. This is really like this. I think this is only the second or third Connie episode, so it fleshes her out a little bit more. It's kind of like a fun standalone episode. It has like this really beautifully animated scene and beautiful scene where Connie and Steven are in Lion and he's walking across the water. It's really well drawn. The music around it is really good. And we kind of start to explore some of Rose's stuff from the past. This is the first episode that you get really intrigued to go, what is going on here? And I got to give it credit for that, for being the first one to do that. I do really like this episode. It's one of the better Lion episodes. And yeah, I just really like it a lot. Super Watermelon Island is a pretty good episode. I do like this one quite a bit. In this episode, we see Pearl, Garnet, and Amethyst go to the Watermelon Island, and we kind of explore through Steven's perspective as a watermelon, which is a little weird, and I maybe I see some of the symbolism they explore, but some of it's just like, I'm not really sure what the hell's going on. But we do see them confront Malachite, we do see the fight, and this is a pretty epic episode. This is the first like pretty big scale episode with a pretty big fight, and what I really like about this episode is we see it from the perspective of the watermelons, which I really like, because it's like almost seeing it from like it's almost like seeing like war from like a non-combatant perspective, and I like that. I think this episode's good. This episode I from memory has really good animation, and yeah, it's just a really good episode. I wouldn't say it has like these amazing thematic moments and emotional moments, but it's a pretty like kick-ass episode. that's really all I can say about it. I really do like it. Next episode is Keeping It Together, and this one is a really good episode. This is an episode that involves Garnet and the Crystal Gems, but emphasis on Garnet, going to the kindergarten to kind of explore where Peridot could be, and they discover these sort of like terrifying gem fusions. And Garnet has this really emotional moment where she's trying to keep it together because she's seeing how Homeworld views fusion, and they view it in such a disgusting sense. They literally think it's like they take the broken parts of Homeworld or gems that fought in the war and literally like force them to fucking be with each other and create these monsters, and it really like fucks with Garnet's psyche. It really, because Garnet is a fusion, and it really just like almost like to the core affects her emotionally, because it's a pretty fucked up thing, and it's pretty fucked up that fusion is used in this way, especially for her. So yeah, I mean that whole sequence is one of my favorite in the show. We see some funny Peridot moments, some goofs with Peridot. You know, that's gonna make me like the episode. Of course, I just really like this episode. I think it's this one is a very tough episode to watch, and not that that's a compliment to the episode. That is definitely the intention. This is one of the creepiest episodes in the whole show, and it's not even necessarily creepy overt. I mean, it is overtly creepy, but it's also like when you really think about the context or the subtext of this episode, it is horrifying. My next episode is Can't Go Back. This episode is a recent episode, or it's in the last season of the show, where Steven is just hanging out. Ronaldo comes by, and I said I only like Ronaldo when they use him in bits. They use him in a cute little bit, so I appreciate it. I'm fine with it. Steven goes to the moon to find Lapis living on there, and they kind of discuss with each other, and Lapis has this really good song, and it kind of explores what I really like about this episode is Lapis has this line where she's like, I can't go back to Earth, what if, you know, something bad happens? And then Steven has the line, well, what if something good happens? And that just like is their conflicting views, Lapis and Steven. And I know a lot of people don't like Lapis as a character, and I can understand why, and I can understand she does have a lot of toxic traits and attributes to her, but I think her toxicity, I'm not necessarily excusing it, but I definitely can understand it and definitely see where it comes from. And I think in this episode, her feelings and her terror come from a place of genuine like PTSD, and that is definitely her character. That definitely is her character flaw, or her main character. I don't want to say her main character trait, but definitely her main character flaw. And I just really like this episode. I really like the concept, how they have this like globe and they can explore it, how she's kind of just watching Peridot and hanging out with Peridot because she loves and misses Peridot, but she's afraid to go back down there and commit to, you know, and that she doesn't want to get involved in another war. Again, really good song. It's our first Lapis song, which it's crazy that it took this long to get a Lapis song. And her voice is, I love the voice actress. I love her voice. So I like the song a lot. It is kind of Disney-like and almost a little bit like cheesy, but I don't mind it. It fits. It works. And then of course at the end of the episode, Steven has this crazy dream involving Pearl, which leads of course into the next episode, which I haven't got to yet for a reason because it's up there. But I really like this episode. Yeah, I really like it. It's good. It's solid. I think it's a needed episode too. I wish we had more Lapis episodes. The Lapis episodes we do have, I actually really like. Actually, I think this is the first Lapis episode for a reason. We still have a lot more Lapis episodes to get to. It's just a shame we didn't get more of these, because I think we really could have explored Lapis a lot more in this show. Next episode probably shocks a shit ton of you. Tiger Millionaire. Season 1, this is definitely the earliest episode at this spot, and some of you may be like, what? You like Tiger Millionaire more than like Can't Go Back and Keeping It Together? How? And the answer is, I have no idea. I love this episode. This episode, honestly, is probably the episode I have the most fun watching in the whole show. I love how it's like a wrestling bit with Amethyst, and Lars is like this super fan. But also I like how they explore how Amethyst uses this to feel strong, because she has a lot of self God, she's very insecure about her strength, so that she uses this to feel strong. And to Garnet and Pearl, that's sort of like ridiculous and unnecessary, but for her, it's the one place she feels free, the one place she can express herself without criticism, and it makes sense for her character. This is the first really episode that we have any semblance of Amethyst's character. And there are episodes later that we explore her character even more, and this one really doesn't explore as much as it hints at it, but I think it does a really good job at it. I think it's funny. I like the music. I actually really do like this episode, and some of you may be surprised it really is this high, but yes, I really like Tiger Millionaire. It is really, really good. And I think anyone who doesn't like it, you're hating on it, because it's watch it. Like, go back and watch it. I know it's like only like the 10th or so episode of the show, but it really is that good. I swear. Like, I swear. Next episode is Back to the Moon, and this one we go back to the moon with the Rubies, because they are looking for Jasper. Amethyst disguises Jasper. It kind of starts off as a very cute episode. They go to the moon, kind of having a fun time. And, Rose Quartz Shard Pink Diamond. Yeah, sorry to drop that on you, but it happened. And then one of the most, like, intense shots with Pearl being, like on her mouth, and Garnet with this look of horror, and Steven just like, what? It comes out of nowhere, but I love how it's delivered. I love how so bluntly it's delivered, and like how Steven is so, like, he refuses to accept it. And of course, their plan falls through, they get discovered, but I love just that scene and that sequence, and I think this is a very funny episode, with that just one dark moment that I really think highlights this episode. I like the Rubies, they're funny. They add a good comic relief, but I think this was like the perfect episode to drop that information, especially where it's at in the series. And I think I really like this episode for that, just for that reason. Yes, the next episode, Together Alone. This one I actually really enjoy. It's one of the last episodes of the show. It's in the Homeworld arc. And in it, we kind of see Steven really trying to appease the diamonds. We actually do explore some interesting concepts with, like, the pearls. How they're like, oh, I like to sing, and I like to draw, and I like to... And it's kind of like their interests coming through, but how they have to suppress them. And how everyone's just like, oh, Steven, just like Pink Diamond, you're so silly, you're such a goof. Like, you want those ball, like, ha ha ha. And Steven's like, seriously, like, I just want to fucking bring my family together. I want to fix everything. And nobody is taking him seriously. And he kind of has to accept that. And we also see, of course, everyone fuse at the end. He actually fuses with Connie, which they all kind of shun. And yeah, that's really the whole episode. It actually doesn't have too much content in it, but I do really like how we explore Homeworld. I actually wish we got a few more episodes like these before the final episode. Maybe like just exploring Homeworld and some of their customs and some of the characters on there, their traditions and standards, and why they exist, or at least how they exist even more. I don't know. But I do really like this episode a lot. I think it does a good job of fleshing out Homeworld, fleshing out some of the minor characters around Steven, and showing his sort of struggle of bringing everyone together, and how constantly put down he is, and how constantly mocked, and how constantly pretty much everything. Like, he's a very... No one really takes him seriously, and that's something that really affects him. So, yeah, I don't know. I just really like this episode. Next episode is Marble Madness. In this episode, we see the gems kind of exploring the marbles, trying to stop them, getting exhausted, going with Steven's plans to following them, and of course getting introduced then to Peridot, which, I think is an amazing scene between Steven and Peridot. They sort of confront each other. You realize things are getting heated. You kind of really start to explore Peridot. Finally, get to see her have a speaking role. I really like this episode because the gems are still very reluctant to listen to Steven. They're kind of like, oh, no, like, we need to do what we gotta do, and your plan kind of is just, it's probably not gonna work, and they still put him down. Like, Steven gets put down a lot in this show, if not by the diamonds later on, but by the crystal gems earlier on, which is a parallel they do draw on in another episode I'll probably talk about in a bit. But, yes, I really like how they explore that theme in this episode, how we finally meet Peridot. I think this is a very well-paced episode. It's a very exciting episode, and it really doesn't have any dull moments in them. I really like this episode a lot. Next episode is Island Adventure. And this episode, from what I hear, has a lot of mixed reviews or mixed reception. In this episode, we see Sadie and Lars and Steven go to an island. Steven goes there to fix their relationship. Maybe something Steven shouldn't get involved in, but he does. And they get stuck on the island. We see Sadie and Lars go through these relationships. They kiss, they sleep together, all this stuff. And then Sadie at the end realizes, Lars and Steven realizes that, Sadie kept them here. And Sadie's action is one that is not healthy, not morally right, kind of toxic. But I think it comes from a genuine place. I think people get really upset when characters on Steven Universe do stuff that is toxic and then say, I don't like that because it's toxic. But I think showing these toxic things, that's good. Because these things happen. People do toxic things. It doesn't ruin characters. This episode doesn't ruin Sadie. If anything, it elevates her, I think, and Lars. I think this episode really fleshes out them individually and their relationship, which is a very complicated one. Lars is so sucked up in his connection to the world, and Sadie just wants to bring him down to earth. Bring him down and maybe show him how much she really cares about him. Something they kind of express in this episode, maybe unhealthy, but it also kind of feels natural. It feels normal. It doesn't feel like fiction. It feels kind of real in that way, because it isn't like their relationship is very complicated. And this episode has a really good song. I think it's a very underrated song in the series. So I'll give it that. I think the animation's pretty good. I think it's a funny episode, cute episode. It's a pretty intense episode at times. I think this is a very good episode, and I think it is sort of maybe hated on a little more than it should from people that I've talked to. Maybe the general consensus is this episode is good, but I've talked to some people who don't really like this episode. But I do actually love this episode. Next episode is Bubbled. This is the one that follows Back to the Moon, where Steven is in space, bubbled with Eyeball, the ruby. And in this episode, Steven and Eyeball sort of confront each other's ideologies. They come from completely different places. Steven kind of learns about his Eyeball's worldview, tries to confront it. It doesn't really work. It kind of ends poorly for him. But he really does try to help him. And in this episode, it's maybe one of the first times, well, I guess we maybe saw in Bismuth in another episode, but this is one of the first times we see Steven really tries to help people, and they just do not accept his help sometimes. And that is another toxic trait. And that is something that Steven really can't control. And that's something that definitely deeply affects Steven. And we actually see that in a later episode. I'll talk about more in a bit. But yeah, I really like this episode. This is a very focused episode because it really just takes place in space in a bubble. That's the whole episode. But it's a very much needed episode. I think we kind of start to see Steven sort of confront homeworld gems, kind of confront their ideologies, confront them as people. And I think that's very important. Next episode is Future Vision. This is, of course, the episode where we learn about Future Vision, or Garnet's Future Vision. And what I really like about this is when Garnet introduces it, she's kind of just like, things can happen. I can kind of maybe see certain outcomes, blah, blah, blah. And at first it's kind of like, that's cool. But then we see how that just fucks with Steven, and how maybe Steven isn't emotionally ready to deal with that. He starts to get nervous what will happen, what will not happen. And this is an amazing scene at the end of the episode with Steven filled with anxiety. Garnet said, don't go on the roof, whatever you do. Steven goes on the roof, and we have a very emotional moment where Garnet almost breaks down and says, I'm so sorry I did this to you. I'm so sorry I filled you with anxiousness. I should have known this. I can see a million things. This is the line from the episode. I can see a million things that could hurt you, and I never wanted one of them to be me. And that's a very powerful line. It fleshes out Garnet a little bit more. I like that. And yeah, this is a very emotional episode, especially towards the end, but also does have a lot of comedic elements. But yeah, this is a very solid episode. I really like this one. Next episode is Familiar. Not only do I think this episode has one of the most underrated songs, I really like the song Familiar. I'll talk more about that in a second. But I really like this episode because we finally start to explore Homeworld. We see how Blue Diamond and Yellow Diamond live their lives, how Rose had pebbles in her room that did stuff for her, and how that translates to the room in the temple that makes stuff. We also see how the homeworld, like the walls are alive and it's kind of like creepy. But what really we explore is how Steven, in the song, he realizes he's been here before. This seems familiar, right? The diamonds are kind of treating him like a kid. They're kind of pushing away his feelings and ignoring him and not really acknowledging or accepting him for who he is, or not, at the very least, maybe just not accepting his beliefs, or not even his beliefs, but listening to him and like taking him seriously. They really do not take him seriously. And he's like, this is familiar, like this family is struggling, right? And it draws parallel to the crystal gems, right? To Pearl, Garnet, and Amethyst. Like, oh, I've done this before. This is familiar. I gotta do this again. Turns out it's a little harder than maybe he would expect it to be, as we find out in the next couple episodes. But yeah, I really like this episode. I like the themes of this episode. I like the song of this episode, and I just love. Yeah, I really love this episode a lot. It's really good. The next episode is Now We're Only Falling Apart. This episode comes right after A Single Pale Rose, and I think this actually answers a lot of questions from The Single Pale Rose. We really explore Pink Diamond and Rose as a character, who she was before Rose, and how turning into Rose changed her, why she did it, why did Pearl go along with her, and how the whole rebellion started. This is a very important episode because it really explains how and why the rebellion really started. It explains Rose's sudden change of I guess attitude and really personality and maturity. And I think this is a great episode because it really does explore those elements. It really explores how she tried to deal with the diamond's destructive nature and how she sort of fell in love with Earth, how she sort of fell in love with everyone, and how Garnet was so integral to that because she's telling the story to Sapphire, right? How Garnet was so significant to that story, which I think is really important. And yeah, I think this is a really good episode. I really like this one a lot. Yeah, thumbs up. The next episode I have ranked is actually the episode that comes right after Now We're Falling Apart, and it's called What's Your Problem? People may actually be shocked to see this episode on here because it is kind of a semi-filler episode, but this is one of, I think, the most underrated episodes, because in this episode we've been seeing how everyone's dealing with Rose, the revelation of Rose being Pink Diamond, and we kind of get that from Amethyst's perspective. We have like an Amethyst Steven episode, and Amethyst is almost like, Steven, I don't want you to worry about this. You have too much stress on here. You are worrying about this way too much. I'm not going to fall apart on you because you need me. You need us. And I know that you need us around you. And I'm trying to keep myself together emotionally, but it's very hard. But I'm trying to do it for you. Fleshing out Amethyst's character even more. I love it. I love at the end, Steven kind of has this like line where he says, Amethyst, you're kind of like the most mature crystal gem, which is like kind of like humorous, but also when you like think about it, kind of true in a weird way. She's the only one holding herself together for Steven. Everyone's literally falling apart, as we found out in the next episode, in terms of Garnet and, I guess metaphorically, Pearl and Steven. Amethyst is trying to be there so Steven can rely on her. And I really like this episode. I like the interactions. I think it's a very heartfelt episode. Yeah, I really do enjoy this one quite a bit. I think this one is actually really underrated, and I can see why a lot of people wouldn't necessarily like crown this as a really, really good episode. I understand that. That being said, though, I think it is. Next episode is Friendship. This is the episode that ends the arc between Pearl and Garnet. They make up. They go try to catch Peridot. They get caught in this like little booby trap area, and then they get forced in with each other as the walls close, and they have this really sincere moment. We explore Pearl even more, how she's like, I need someone to tell me what to do. You know, I need someone to help me out, to guide me, to boss me around. She has such struggles being independent and being an individual. And she's like, I just wanted to fuse with you to feel strong because you're all put together. And Garnet's like, I'm not as strong as you think. You know, I unfused over this. Like, I am not as put together as you think. Like, I know I have this persona or aura that I'm all put together, but I'm not necessarily put together. A very heartfelt conversation. They fuse, of course, to escape. But yeah, I think just that scene alone, those interactions, and how the episode kind of starts off with Pearl and Garnet sort of fumbling around each other, and they're clearly not synced up, and how by the end of this episode they make up by expressing each other's personal feelings. I think that's very important, and I think it's a really good episode. And I just burped. I'm so sorry. That was very nasty. It tastes like spinach. I don't know what the fuck's wrong with me, but yeah. Next episode. The next episode is back to the barn. This is during the Peridot arc. They go back to the barn to start working on the drill. And this is where we, again, explore Peridot and Pearl a little more. And we see, again, how Peridot sort of, how she has these, like, biases built into her. She looks at Pearl and goes, "You're a servant. Like, you're just going to do what I say. Like, that's who you are." And Pearl is like, that's not who I am, and I'll prove it to you. And they have this robot like competition, this robot fight. It's a very silly, fun episode, but I love the scene at the end when Pearl punches Peridot in the face, and Peridot just destroys her, and she's like, "Yes, I won, praise me!" And they all go to Pearl, and they're like, "Pearl, are you okay? You're right." And Peridot's confused. This is very unorthodox. Strength kind of prevails in the homeworld hierarchy. It's important to have that, and to see them sort of accept Pearl for who she is and care about her and concern her. She's like, "This doesn't make any sense. Like, I won. I should be praised. What's going on?" And Garnet's like, "Welcome to Earth." And Peridot's sort of like, "Huh? Like, I have a lot to learn." It's very alien to me. And I really like that. I really like all of that. I think this, even beyond that thematic and interesting character development part or scene, I just like this episode as a whole. I think it's very funny. I think it's a very, very solid episode. Next episode is Steven versus Amethyst. This episode takes place during the Amethyst arc, which is one of my favorites in the show. And in this episode, Amethyst just got defeated by Jasper. She's very doubtful and very self-conscious about her strength, like I've talked about before, and we see Steven try to help her out by letting her win in video games and trying to be nice to her, but it doesn't work. It almost insults Amethyst, and they fight each other because they're both so self-conscious about themselves. And they have this very genuine conversation at the end where Amethyst is like, "You don't know what it's like to be me. Like, I'm supposed to be something and I can't be like that." And Steven's like, "Of course I understand. Everyone wants me to be like Rose, and I don't even know her at all. I don't even know who she is, and I have to do this." And it's a very important episode because, of course, as we'll talk about later, this is one of the episodes that I think is the reason they fuse. It really sets up or solidifies their relationship even more. And I just like how they play off each other, and they both sort of bond over this common sort of feeling that they're not who they're supposed to be. They feel like their whole purpose is to be one thing, and if they can't live up to that, then they're kind of useless. But they kind of learn together that's not the case, and they bond over that. And I think this is a very important episode, very heartfelt episode, and another episode just to flesh out Amethyst, which I like, because I like episodes that flesh out characters. So, yeah. Next episode is Steven's Dream. In this episode, Steven kind of has a weird dream about a palanquin or like involving Blue Diamond. The gems are like, "Don't worry about it." They find kind of this book, and he's like trying to figure it out, and they get into a huge argument. Steven's like, "Fuck you guys! Like, I'm going to explore this." His dream is obviously like really sort of messed up, and we see how the crystal gems really don't know how to handle this, especially Pearl and Garnet. They know that Steven's going to learn things about Blue Diamond that they don't want him to learn just yet. They don't think he's ready to learn. But he is so impatient to learn things, almost representative of viewers of the show. He's so impatient to learn things that he acts very hostile towards them. I really like this episode because I like the thematic purposes of it. I think it fleshes out a lot of characters. It fleshes out a lot of interactions. And it, again, solidifies the point that Steven doesn't like being... Steven demands to be taken seriously, and it almost bothers him when the crystal gems sort of put him down, or at least hide stuff from him to protect him. Like, he feels like he doesn't need to be protected anymore. And it also stems out of the rage of learning how he learned that Pink, or a Rose, supposedly shattered Pink Diamond. So I think all of that is very important, and for that reason, I really like this episode a lot. And yeah. Next episode is Stuck Together. In this episode, we see Steven and Lars literally stuck together inside of Topaz, going to Homeworld. And this episode is another one filled with great character development for Lars. We see how Lars kind of is talking about his insecurities. He feels like he really can't stand up to people. He's very, very, very timid. He feels like he is like a wuss, as he says. And Steven almost tries to help him emotionally and say, listen, Lars, like, Lars is almost like shocked how well Steven is put together. He's like, you just keep everything so together. And Steven's like, of course I don't. Like, this all affects me, but we need to stay strong to deal with this. And a very emotional moment between him and Lars. It makes me tear up. It also makes Topaz tear up, which is one of the most comedic scenes in the whole show, where she is like crying and stuff. That's a great scene. Aquamarine, of course, is a character I find humorous. So this episode, a lot of emotions in it. I think it's a very solid episode. It's very much needed in this arc, because it kicks off the arc where the trial arc, and I think it's a very good way to start it. And like I said, I like a lot of the scenes here. It's a very emotional episode. It's a very important thematic episode, and I really like it a lot. The next episode is Maximum Capacity, another Amethyst episode, but an Amethyst and Greg episode. In this episode, we see Greg trying to clear out his sort of garage, clean it out. Amethyst comes to help. They start watching little Butler videos, and then things get really fucked up. So basically, what I really like about this episode is Amethyst and Greg relationship is very complicated. Basically, at the very end of the episode, we see Greg and Amethyst have this interaction where Amethyst shapeshifts in the Rose because she feels that Greg is casting her to the side. She wants constant attention from Greg. She clearly has or had a thing for Greg, and she clearly wants that again, to recreate it. And Greg almost is like, no, I need to be there for my son. Like, we can't do this. And Amethyst is kind of, once again, toxic in this episode. She does some sort of fucked up things, but I think that is just a reflection on her insecurities and doesn't necessarily reflect her as a bad person. I think people get that misconstrued too much. But she does something really fucked up. Transforming in the Rose is one of the most fucked up scenes in the entire show. And we see how she even blames Greg for Rose being gone. She said, I had Rose and now I don't. And she almost blames it for him. It's really heavy stuff. So yeah, and they also have like this really good resolution at the end where Amethyst fixes the frame for Greg, the picture of Greg and Rose, frames it for them, and I yeah, very heartfelt episode, very emotional episode, very heavy episode, but a very good one as well. The next episode is an Indirect Kiss. I really like the format of this episode. Not only does it introduce that Steven has healing powers, not only is it a Steven and Connie episode, which, you know, I'm pretty partial to, but I also like the format of this episode. Steven tells a story to Connie that kind of explore the past. We see Steven try to get his healing powers and how he sort of struggles to get those healing powers, and how he has the insecurities of he can't really be like his mom, and he reflects that in the flashback. And Connie is like, it's alright, like, tries to help him out, and they learn he has healing powers not through tears but through spit. This episode has a lot of funny moments in it. It has a lot of emotional moments in it. I think it has one of the most beautiful scenes with the fountain coming back alive, and the music is incredible. I love Rose's Fountain's theme. I think it's one of my favorites of the show. I just really like this episode. I think it's really good. I think it's solid. I don't really have any complaints about it. And yeah, it's very good. The next episode I also really like. It's called Bardmates. It's a Peridot and Lapis episode. It's actually the first Peridot and Lapis episode, and we see how Lapis is trying to find a home. Peridot is like, hey, let me show you Earth, and Lapis is very toxic and dismissive towards Peridot. And some may say, again, wow, how could Lapis be such a toxic person? But from her perspective, basically, she was kidnapped by Peridot because she had information. She was then used against Peridot, and then she literally stayed under the ocean forever, holding Jasper down. She comes back up, and now Peridot's there, and she missed everything. She missed the whole arc. She missed her whole redemption. She doesn't know how she's changed, And by the end, she does learn that. But what I really like about this episode is how this episode is really funny. It has a lot of comedic moments. These two, Peridot and Lapis, just clash really well against each other. I'm very glad the writers early on sort of set that up and planned for that, because it does work very, very well. But yeah, I really like their interactions. And I really like, there's a lot of good moments in this episode. One of my favorites is the one where Peridot gives the recorder to Lapis, and the card scene, of course, where she says, "I'm sorry I interrogated you. You just had so much useful information." Again, yeah, Peridot's not great at being sincere sometimes. But the scene where she gives her the tape recorder and Lapis breaks it, is, you almost feel for Peridot. Like, oof, like, I'm sorry, Peridot. But you understand both perspectives, I think. And I really do enjoy how they try to get along. And I just love, I think it fleshes out Peridot, and Lapis even more fleshes out their relationship, which is one of my favorites in the show. And yeah, I like this episode. Soft spot for it. We have another early season 1 episode being Steven the Sword Fighter. This is the episode where Pearl starts to teach Steven about sword fighting with Hollow Pearl. He's very impatient. Pearl's like, "You need to listen to me," and then boom, she gets stabbed. Steven freaks out. She obviously poofs, and then they wait for her to reform. This is a very horrifying episode. It has some really horrifying scenes in it with Hollow Pearl. It also shows the concept of poofing, which I think is important, and it also is it's a very well written, very well paced episode. It's very well put together. I really like every aspect of this episode. Upon rewatching it, I actually like it even more than when I first saw it. I think it does stand out as its own episode, and I think it does stand. It's a very funny episode, but those are very, again, heartfelt episode. It does flesh Pearl out a little bit, but I think it also just fleshes out the other specifically Steven, and some of the Crystal Gems, but Steven, without Pearl. So I don't know. I just really like this episode. I think it's really good. The next episode is Full Disclosure. Easily, Full Disclosure is one of the most underrated songs in the whole show. It, at one point, was one of my favorites, and then when we got outside of season 1, I was like, well, there's so many good ones. But I do really like the song. I really like the point of this episode. Steven is he doesn't want people to freak out and be concerned about him. And I think this comes from a place of genuine sort of, he cares about people around him. He doesn't want them to freak out about him. He doesn't think he's that important. And of course, he doesn't really communicate that with Connie. They kind of have this very emotional moment at the end, and Steven sort of opens up towards her and tells her everything, all the traumatic events that just happened in the last episode, Jailbreak. But yeah, I really like this episode. I think it is an episode that deals a lot with being emotionally open, deals a lot with Steven's character, and yeah, I like it. The next episode is Space Race, and speaking of emotional, oh boy, and speaking of Pearl episodes, you're going to see a lot. You're going to see a lot, because Pearl episodes are typically my favorite. And this one, actually, of all the Pearl episodes, is one of my least favorite. Not to say it's bad, but there's just so many other ones that are so much better. But I do really like this episode. In this one, Pearl wants to go back to, or Steven's talking about going back to space, and Pearl kind of gets obsessed with this project that Greg's involved in to show Steven space, and then we see how much she really wants to, and oh fuck, she's taking Steven to space, and she just wants to show him space, and it's very emotional. She's like, Steven's like, "You have to know when to bail," and Pearl is almost blinded from how much she wants to educate Steven, how much she wants to show Steven and teach Steven, to the point where they almost die. It's a pretty dark and brutal episode, but I like this episode a lot. I think it is one of the first ones that get me really, really emotional. And another episode that really fleshes out Pearl as a character. She just wants to show him space. The next episode is Lars of the Stars. Not only does this episode have a lot of anime references that I really appreciate, but it's such a good episode. I love how we pop in, we see Lars with the off colors and gem, a ship they stole from Emerald, who's chasing them, and everything's going well until Lars kind of almost is like a character. He almost reverts back to his old character, where he learns that Sadie's hanging out with the cool kids, and how could she do this without him? She's doing it to spite him. But then, of course, Steven and Connie sort of talk talk sense into him and say, she wouldn't do that. Like, are you doing this to hurt her? And he's like, well, of course not. And they're like, yeah, exactly. Things move on. People move on. It's how the world works. She went through a lot of emotional stuff, and she did it without you, and she's going to do it without you. And you kind of have to move on from that. That's life. I love that messaging. I love that theme. And also, just an awesome episode. Really funny, really cool. They go in this little mini ship. They get stranded. That's how the episode ends. But yeah, really cool episode. It's so jarring because last time we saw Lars, he was in a cave. They pop through and boom, like all this shit's going on. And it's a great way to just drop us in. I really love that and appreciate it. So yeah, I like this episode quite a bit. The next episode is an episode people hold in high regard, and I obviously do too because it's high on my list. It's probably not high on... some people will probably have this episode much higher on their list. I do really like it though, being The Answer. This is the backstory episode of Garnet, how Ruby and Sapphire met each other. I love the stylistic decision at the beginning of this episode to have it very like shaded, right? And then when they actually go back down to the surface on Earth, it goes back like the original Steven Universe style. I really like the style choice of this episode. I think this episode introduces a lot of important things, how how strict Homeworld is on fusion, and how appalled and disgusted they are of two different gems fusion, and how if you don't realize how that's a representation of LGBT, right, or discrimination LGBT people face, then you definitely missed the point of this episode. But yeah, I think that symbolism is very important. I think this episode has a really good underrated song too. I think it's a very beautiful episode, seeing Garnet fuse for the first time, accepting her fusion, and even Rose coming up to her and she's like, I'll unfuse, and Rose is like, forget about that, like how you feel is important here. And that's a very sincere moment and kind of represents the Crystal Gems motto and their mentality, and still to this day represents their mentality, who they are. They are people who accept each other and don't view love and fusion in such a very sort of unhealthy way that Homeworld does. So yeah, I like this episode a lot. The next episode is also during Peridot's sort of redemption arc. It's called Too Far, and in this one we see Amethyst and Peridot have an episode together, and I think it's a really good one. We see how alien Peridot really is, and how Amethyst specifically, finds amusement from that. They go to the kindergarten to go on this mission, and Peridot's going off about, oh, Pearl is a servant, and blah blah blah, and Garnet is this freak, two gems put together, and Amethyst is laughing and finding it funny until, of course, Peridot tries to make her laugh by talking about her and how, yeah, you're defective. And that just hurts Amethyst, hurts her all self-worth, and she just loses it and gets really angry. And Peridot thinks she's being funny, and Steven has to talk to her and say, you really hurt her feelings. And Peridot finally expresses to Amethyst, I'm sorry I hurt your feelings, really opens up. I love this episode, exploring Amethyst's insecurities even more, exploring how Peridot views them. It's a very important, sincerely emotional episode. I really like this one. This one is easily one of my favorite Amethyst episodes. I really like this one. I think it does a good job. I think their character pairing is one I really enjoy, and I think this episode does a really good job of exploring that. The next episode is Monster Reunion, and this one Steven attempts to heal Centipedal with his healing powers and make some progress, but not the progress he wants. The gem is still corrupted, although can now kind of have hands and such, and it sort of tells the backstory of everything. They were on this planet. Suddenly, this beam of light came down from Homeworld and corrupted everyone. What's really fucked up about this episode is it reveals how brutal Homeworld was. They didn't even care that they had their own gems on Earth. They were so upset about, or just wanted to end everything. They had literally just fucking yeeted fucking Earth in such a like awful genocidal way. A very emotional episode. We see how Centipedal just wants to go back and can't accept it, but of course it does get reunited with its other captains. In the ship, of course. And yeah, this is a very emotional episode. This is a very, I think, important episode lore-wise. It reveals a lot. It explores a lot of thematic elements that I think are very important to the show at its core. And yeah, I really like this one very much. The next episode is Nightmare Hospital, a Steven and Connie episode. Steven and Connie go to the hospital to get their sword back from Connie's mother. And this is an episode that very much is actually focused on Connie more than Steven, and specifically Connie's relationship to her mom. Her mom almost is so overprotective that she almost dismisses Connie at points. Connie is like, I don't even need my glasses anymore, and you haven't even noticed. You don't even know who I am. I can use swords. I've been doing all this magical stuff. Like, you kind of have to accept me for who I am. And it's a very heartfelt episode, very horrifying episode, and I think very well written episode from beginning to end. Like, the pacing in this episode is mwah. Like, there's like not a dull moment. It just goes from start to end. But I also really like at the very end we see how Steven's mom and not Steven's mom, Jesus Christ. We see how Connie's mom and Connie have this nice bonding moment where they hug, and Steven watches and he almost feels sad because he doesn't have that. He even hugs Lion because he's like, I wish I could have that moment with my mom that Connie is having with hers. So very emotional stuff. But this episode's really solid. This episode is like, it's so well put together. I love it. Next episode is Alone at Sea, and I love this episode for all the thematic elements of it. It's a Lapis episode. We see Lapis on the ship hanging out with Steven, kind of dealing with some of her trauma, and then we get the big reveal, which I think was such a smart point, such a smart writing element, character writing element, where Lapis is like, I kind of miss being Malachite, and Steven's like, what? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, that was toxic and kind of fucked up, and she's like, yeah, but I miss it. Jasper comes back, also reveals that she misses it. And then Lapis like, well, that was unhealthy and toxic and it wasn't right. And yeah, basically this is just an allegory for being in an abusive relationship. How I think when it comes to abusive relationships, I think a lot of people are very simple-minded on it. When someone gets abused in a relationship, they think it's just like, oh, person A was bad, person B was good, this person got abused, they should have just left them. But it's not that easy. When you get emotionally abused like that, I guess really any of the different ways you can get abused, but when you get abused in a relationship, sometimes it's not so simple walking away, because you still want to be loved and you still want to get through the relationship, even how toxic it is, and how you even miss it, even though you know how bad it was for you. That's such a very smart way of writing this show, writing Lapis, and it's such a smart way of writing how toxic this relationship is, and just how going through an abusive relationship, how it's not so simple. It's not just this person was bad to me and now I don't like them. Relationships are never that simple, and abusive relationships are never that simple. And even sending that message to kids, even if they don't understand the message overtly, I think is super important. So just for that alone, I love this episode. I think it's also a funny episode, a well-written episode, and yeah, very good episode. The next episode we have is Lars' Head. This is the one that is the last episode of the sort of trial arc where Lars was just revived by Steven. Steven goes through his head to get home, and then he has to he goes through his head that connects to Lion. This reveals a lot, how Lion was brought back to life by Rose Quartz, and how Lion Liquors was kind of like a symbolization of that, because through Steven's tears, he brings back life, and it's implied through it was the spit of Rose that brought back life. It's kind of swapped in this case, but I really like this episode. It's an emotional one, one that fleshes out Lars. Steven and Lars have this very heartfelt moment at the end where they're just like, hey, you know, I know we've been through this together, but we're gonna have to separate now, and we're gonna have to make it home separately. Yeah, I really like this episode. It's a great way to conclude it. I think it does a great job of fully circling Lars' character arc, and really is the first episode that we're now like, or maybe the second one that we're now like, wow, Lars, he's grown. He's grown. And yeah, gonna love it. Next episode is Crack the Whip. I think this episode it's another Amethyst episode during the Amethyst arc. It's kind of the one that kicks it off. We see Amethyst kind of helping Steven and Connie train, but she's not taking it so seriously. She's kind of like slacking off, trying to have fun, trying to let loose until, of course, Jasper comes and just fucks her up. Destroys her. Again, hurting her self-worth, saying, you're a runt, you're not worth anything because you're not big. Almost like putting her down because she has like almost like, I guess, a physical... she's almost... I don't think it's just a symbolization, or rather, it just symbolizes disability, like physical disabilities, although it could. I think it also just goes to show how if you don't meet the standards, whether that be physical or emotional, whatever, maybe in this case it's physical, of like a hierarchy, how toxic and damaging that can be to a person. And Jasper ultimately beats Amethyst, but Steven and Connie fuse together, and Stevonnie beats Jasper. Amethyst comes back and has this just devastating line where he's just like, "Oh, you two beat Jasper. You didn't need me at all." And once again, self-worth, or self-conscious. It's very... That line's heartbreaking because it really just... Amethyst has such a warped view of self-worth, and she has such a hard time accepting for who she is. And this episode just sort of solidifies that, as Jasper sort of represents as how Amethyst should have been, at least in her mind, or at least according to Homeworld standards, and how that affects her emotionally. And yeah, it's a good one. And kind of a sad one too. The next episode is Keystone Motel. This is the first episode where we really have a dedicated Ruby and Sapphire episode post learning about how they fused to make Garnet. Of course, Pearl just tricked Garnet into fusing with her so that they could form Sardonyx, and that really fucks with Garnet. Her whole character is so focused on fusion that when fusion was used against her to manipulate her, it really hurts her. And the two, being Ruby and Sapphire, have so conflicting views on how to deal with it and how to emotionally handle it that they split apart. And we see both of their ways of dealing with it, both very unhealthy, and then of course kind of affecting the relationship. The scene in the diner where they destroy the table, and they kind of ruin breakfast for Steven, and he throws his plate on the ground very emotionally, and they realize, oof, we've kind of been hurting Steven. We really have not been dealing this in a healthy way. They make up, of course, a very emotional scene at the end. I really like this episode a lot. I think this is a very important character development for Garnet and Ruby and Sapphire, I guess all of them. And I think does a really good job of exploring how couples can sort of deal with stuff and toxically and not really deal with it together, and also just how people can deal with stuff in an unhealthy manner. And I just think I think this episode is a really appropriate, and it's almost an expected way of how Garnet would deal with this. So yeah. So I'm gonna change outfits again because yet again I've been recording for about an hour now. So I've been recording this video over 3 different days because I don't want to sit for 3 hours and record this. But we still have a couple more episodes to go. So if you see me change my clothes, that's why. But let's get on now to the next episode. And moving on to our next episode, we have Catch and Release. This is sort of the first episode in the Peridot redemption arc, and I think it's such a charming episode, and the writing in this episode, especially the dialogue, feels so well written. Peridot fits like perfectly into the character dynamic. Her and Steven interactions in this episode are so interesting, and I love this episode because it sort of almost reintroduces Peridot's character, or it finally gives us some perspective from Peridot, because we've seen her in these past couple of episodes, trying to escape Earth, but this episode it feels like we're finally seeing somewhat from her perspective and really learning how alien she is and how she perceives the crystal gems, how she perceives Steven, and sort of really how desperate she is, and again, how cute she is. I watching Peridot Once you see Peridot without the limb enhancers and how cute she is, when you see her with it, it just feels wrong. But yeah, this episode's great. I love a lot of the little fun little scenes where she's running in the bathroom and Steven's like, I gotta use that. It's such a good get some good character interactions. So yeah, I really yes, I really like this episode a lot. This is a great episode. The next episode we have is Jungle Moon. This is again a newer episode, season 5. It takes place right after Lars of the Stars. We see Stevonnie stranded on a sort of a like jungle sort of moon in the middle of nowhere trying to survive. I really like this episode because it feels like it is a very standalone episode and it sort of feels self-contained, but I don't know, it feels necessary. It kind of feels like a breath of fresh air. We're exploring this jungle moon, these creatures on there, and Stevonnie. We see kind of Stevonnie sort of like surviving and going. And yeah, I think this is a very well-written episode, and it has probably my favorite dream sequence in the entire show at the end of it, where we start to see Steven's dreams and Connie's dreams because their fuse sort of mix, where we see like Stevonnie in Connie's house. We see Mom, who eventually is Yellow Diamond, and then Stevonnie sort of represents Pink Diamond, and at the time it's like, what is going on? But obviously with the revelation that Rose Quartz is Pink Diamond, it makes a lot of sense, and it's kind of cool how we sort of, these two fused, we sort of see their dreams fuse, and I really like that sequence a lot. I really like how the revelation that, wow, that was like Connie's mom's voice kind of sounds a lot like when it shifts to Yellow Diamond, like it feels natural almost. It's kind of weird, but it's the first time we see Pink Diamond. I just like how this episode stands alone. I think it's well written. I think it's well animated. I love the background designs on this little like jungle moon. Yeah, I really like this episode a lot. The next episode is When It Rains. This is the continuation of the Peridot redemption arc, and just like Catch and Release, I really like this episode a lot, even more so, because we're sort of seeing life through Peridot's sort of eyes. It has one of the most beautiful scenes, I think, in the entire show, when it is raining out and Steven's out playing in the rain, and Peridot like reaches out and feels the rain, and just is like, wow, like, cool. Like, almost like her first moment of being like, wow, like, the earth, maybe it's really not that bad. Like, maybe there is stuff to appreciate here. I really like that a lot. I like how she sort of bonds with Steven in this episode, and because of the bonding that they have together, by the end of it, she is definitely acceptant, or rather accepts to help the Crystal Gems, deal with the cluster. But yeah, I really like this episode a lot because I just really enjoy. I really enjoy Peridot as a character. I really enjoy her redemption arc. I enjoy her character dynamic in the end of season 2. And I think this is the reason why I put this episode only slightly higher, not much higher, but slightly higher than Catch and Release, is because I think it doesn't sort of, not that Catch and Release gets bogged down, but it doesn't even have to really, it doesn't have to show Peridot getting captured in a bubble, which was fine in Catch and Release, obviously, but I feel like this benefits from being a continuation episode and can just start off and end with just having a Peridot episode and having it from her POV somewhat, which I really enjoy. The next episode, would you believe it, another episode in the Peridot redemption arc, and actually kind of the last one, or I guess Log Date would be the last one, next to last one, or the one where her arc is complete. Message Received, where she is she has now the object to contact Yellow Diamond. Steven is very disappointed in her. And listen, it's very simple writing, but it is always effective. In a redemption arc, it's very simple. You have a character start somewhere, right? And they start to progress as a character, and then they slip up, right? And then they redeem themselves at the very end. It happens in every redemption arc. It's a formula, but it works so well, and it works here. We see Peridot almost slip up by saying, I'm going to contact Yellow Diamond, I need to get back, I need to get out of here, I need like her, the tradition into her, and the, I guess, pride almost in her is like, I need to sort of revert back. I need to contact Yellow Diamond and tell her everything I know. And the Crystal Gems are like trying to stop her, but she finally does reach Yellow Diamond. And this sequence I love. I think it's perfect. I think it would have been poor writing if she just called Yellow Diamond and was like, Yellow Diamond, like, I'm ready to come back, or fuck Yellow Diamond, this sucks. She kind of does actually genuinely try to be like, listen, Yellow Diamond, yes, I still serve you, but we could use this planet for so much more. I want to help you. Let me give you some ideas. And it makes some sense for a character. It actually comes from a place it comes from a good place. Yet again, she still doesn't see the full value in Earth just yet. And she doesn't see how hollowing it out and using it for the Empire is such a disgusting and bad thing. She doesn't really appreciate life just yet. But she is sort of appreciative of Steven. And to see her then put Steven over Yellow Diamond in the end, and to say, you're wrong, we could use this planet, and to realize that maybe Yellow Diamond doesn't see it the same way, and her calling her Claude, and the amazing scene with the Yellow Diamond's face. It makes this episode so great. It makes so much sense for their characters, for her character, and it is a perfect way to resolve her arc. And this episode also has some really funny moments before the Yellow Diamond stuff, to kind of, with Amethyst turning into a helicopter and such, just to kind of like give you that happy, funny feeling before we get into like the real fucking shit, being the final scene of the episode. So, yeah. The next episode is The Return. This is really the first really huge episode of the show. Obviously, the Crystal Gems are where that Peridot and someone else is coming to Earth, and they say we need to evacuate the city. Steven is sort of distraught to hear that he's leaving. He's like, I'm a Crystal Gem too, and they're like, well, it's too dangerous. So instead, he starts going, and I love this scene that Steven and Greg have in the car while they're driving, where Steven is sort of like, yeah, well, it kind of sucks that gems are fighting each other. Like, you know what I mean? Like, gems shouldn't fight other gems. And also, even on top of that, like, it kind of sucks that these gems are invading this planet. And Greg's kind of like, yeah, dude, but, like, that's kind of what the Crystal Gems did. They kind of invaded this planet. They're aliens, and you kind of have to accept that. And Steven's like, whoa, like, I didn't think of them like that. And he's like, well, they fought the war, and the war is over. Everything's all good. And then Greg's like, wars don't work like that, my friend. Like, you have to sacrifice a lot, and it's never so clean. There's never just one winner and one loser, and everything works out perfectly. It's not the reality of war. And Steven's sort of accepting that, and then realizing, I have to be there for them. They need my shield. They need me. And him going back is such a heartfelt moment. And then he gets back, and then of course shit fucking goes down as Jasper comes up and destroys them. Love the beautiful scene where Steven takes out the shield, and we finally see Jasper be like, rose quartz? What the fuck? And everything sort of comes full circle, and we're like, oh boy, here we go. And it's the first real moment where we feel like shit is going down. We are finally exploring the real lore of the show, and we're finally getting into homeworld shit. It gets really interesting. So yeah, I really like this episode for that. I think it's a very well written episode, and I think it is a perfect lead up to Jailbreak, and I think it does everything it needs to do. And yeah, it's a great episode. The next episode, and would you imagine it, the only episode we have yet to talk about in the Peridot arc, is It Could Have Been Great. This is my favorite episode in the Peridot Redemption arc, because I love so many things about this episode. It starts off with an amazing song, and Peridot is singing along, sort of revealing her feelings to the Crystal Gems, sort of feels like she's actually becoming part of the Crystal Gems. Then we go to the moon base. And that's where we start learning things about the diamonds. Peridot feels like Peridot is almost educating Steven on the diamonds, stuff that the Crystal Gems feel very uncomfortable talking to him about. But Peridot has no problem, so it's like they're in an awkward situation because we really don't want him learning this stuff. But Peridot, we finally start to see the norms of how Peridot views the diamonds, and how she kind of worships them, and how the sort of social class and social norms and classism. Like how Steven, you can't sit in that chair, even though of course that's good symbol foreshadowing because he's a diamond. And Steven's like, well, they're not here now, sit with me. But I really like the scene at the very end where they explore they explore the sort of the how Earth would look like if it was a finished colony, and how the crystal gems are horrified. And Peridot's like, what's wrong? Like, why don't you like this? And Steven has to explain to her, like, they fought against this. Like, they fought their whole lives against this. Like, this is what they've been doing for thousands of years. Like, you gotta understand that. And then Peridot kind of calls out Rose Quartz, and then there's like this conflict, and he has to kind of stop it. And I love how this episode ends with Peridot snatching the communicator. Obviously, we see a message received, but I like how she snatches that because, as we see in just a little bit, she sort of starts reverting back. And I think this is a pivotal point for Peridot as a character. It makes sense that she would start reverting like this and start sort of talking about things like this and almost get nostalgic and idolizing the diamonds because it's so built into her. It's so built that the classism is so built into the Homeworld Gems. It's almost hard to root out. And that's what we kind of start exploring in this episode. I really love this episode a lot. I think it's great. I think it's a very, very, very good episode. So these are 2 episodes. They're not one, but they're kind of like a 2-parter. And even though like the return and Jailbreak is part 1 and part 2, I think part 2 is significantly better because we haven't got to it obviously than part 1, or it's better. It's at least more measurably better that I ranked it higher. But these episodes I put together because I do really think they play out. They play out really right into each other. These 2 episodes is the end of the Amethyst arc where she is fighting Jasper, and in the first part, it may seem just like a very silly, fun episode, but we go back to the barn. We sort of see how Peridot and Lapis are getting along. We have some cute interactions. And then we get to the kindergarten. Amethyst wants to feel better about herself. So I say, let's go to Jasper's kindergarten and see her whole. So I can maybe feel better about herself. Peridot's like, it's perfect. And then Steven's like, what are you doing? Like, this isn't how you feel better about yourself, to try to take other people down. Like, you need to have confidence in who you are, right? And then, of course, we get the Jasper fight, which is, I think, a great moment. A lot happens here. We get Smoky Quartz, which is a great fusion. I love that a lot. We get an awesome sequence of the fight. Jasper corrupting herself, which makes a lot of sense for her character. She's what she's willing to do to feel stronger. And then, of course, we get the sequence where Pink Diamond is first revealed, where she's like, what you did to my diamond, Pink Diamond. And Steven's like, Yellow Diamond? And she's like, your diamond, everyone's diamond, the Pink Diamond. And you're like, wait, what? And that's when you kind of first get the sense like, wait a minute, Pink Diamond was the one who colonized Earth, or was in charge of colonizing Earth. And that's when things get really interesting. But yeah, I love this episode a lot. I think it does so many things right. These 2 episodes, I think they fit so perfectly together. It would be really hard for me to outrank one over the other. I just think they're so good. They fit so well together, and they do a great job of finishing off Amethyst's arc. The next episode is an episode I watch a lot. I go back and watch this episode like all the time by itself because I think it's such a great episode, and that's Cry for Help. And of course, it's kind of a Pearl episode. Basically, in this episode, the communication hub gets repaired by Peridot, and then we finally see Garnet and Pearl fuse, which is my favorite fusion in the whole show. But besides that, I love Sardonyx. I think I love her voice. I love how she's just very like almost like a theater kind of. She's very like flamboyant, and she just like almost like a curtain when she comes out. It's perfect. I love her sort of style. But this episode sort of explores something deeper, because as we go on, Amethyst kind of feels like she is left out. She kind of feels like it's her fault why Sugilite was so hard to control. She really got out of control. And then we see Pearl kind of feeling the same way, because again, like Amethyst, she has a lot of self-worth issues. So she then tricks Garnet to keep fusing. Obviously, Steven and Amethyst learn of this, reveal it to Garnet, and there's just this moment of just horror on Garnet's face as she lets go of Pearl and says, "You did this to me? Are you fucking kidding me? Like, fusion is everything I am, and you did this to me." And it's this moment where you're like you feel for Pearl, and Amethyst, and they go up to Garnet and say, we just want, we want to feel stronger with you. And then she's like, how can you defend her? Like, how can you stand for this? Like, this is just wrong. Like, you literally tricked me. It is, what Pearl did is just horrible, and it's just, it's so wrong. But you don't necessarily feel like, you feel like where it comes from makes sense for her character. You know, she does feel so insecure. She does have a lot of self-worth problems, and she does use Garnet to make herself feel better. And you understand why she did it, but it's still like just awful. And it really breaks the Crystal Gems apart for a couple episodes. And it's a perfect way to start off. I just love this episode. I think it has so many deep emotional moments and meanings, and it's easily one of the best. This is a great episode. The next episode we are getting to is Warp Tour. I love this episode. Love this episode. In this episode, Steven is in the warp. He kind of pops outside of the warp and sees something and tells the Crystal Gems, and they go, we don't really believe you. And it drives Steven fucking insane. He literally can't sleep at night. He's afraid something's coming after him. And he keeps getting arguments with the gems, right? And we see how Pearl is just so dismissive. I mean, all the Crystal Gems are, but Pearl especially is so dismissive of how Steven's feeling, and Steven just can't deal with it. And he literally gets to the point where he literally goes to a warp by himself, almost fucking dies. Just to prove that he was right. And there's this amazing, like, sad fucking scene where Steven's floating in space about to die, and he goes, I was right. Like, oh, I just wanted to be right. And he has like sense of like relax, like, I'm right, but now I'm dead. Gets saved last minute. And oh, by the way, of all that it wasn't like perfect for a good episode, we finally get the introduction of Peridot in this episode, where at the very end we see all the little bubbles fix the galaxy warp. We see Peridot come back. She leaves, obviously, because she's the sticker, but we get introduced to Peridot. And there's this moment where, like, what the fuck is going on? Huh? And Garnet's like, don't worry, she's never coming back. Destroys the fucking warp. And it's just like, holy shit. Like, this is just like, this episode is like 11 minutes long, but like, it's packed from beginning to end. It's so well paced. It's so well written. And it's the first episode that you really start to feel these complex emotions. You start to feel like shit is really going down. And it's awesome. This is a phenomenal episode. The next episode is Alone Together, and this, of course, is the introduction of Stevonnie. I love the beginning of this episode. We start to see, like, the Crystal Gems show Steven how to fuse, and they're all dancing, and Steven's, like, trying to do it, like, very silly and goofy, because it's not his style. Teach him how to fuse. And it makes sense the first person he would fuse with would be Connie, because it's the person he's definitely the closest to. And the two that have they're the same age, they're around the same age. It makes sense, right? And I love this episode because we see them fuse, and we see them go back, and the Crystal Gem's like, what? Well, no, this is like unprecedented. And Pearl's almost like, all right, maybe you should unfuse. And Garnet's like, no, go out and have fun, be yourself. And we have this amazing sequence where they're going out and it's so beautiful. It's so wholesome and beautiful, and it's a great episode to really introduce how fusion really is. Because at this point we were like, oh, fusion's really only for battles. It's really only used when we need it. But here we see that no, like, fusion can be such more than that. This is before we even know that Garnet's a fusion. This is the first real introduction that fusion can be this like experience, this relationship, this healthy and loving bond between these two people, and it's so beautiful. And Stevonnie is such a beautiful representation. We have some amazing scenes, like the one where she goes into the big donut, and she's talking to Lars and Sadie, and they're just like stunned by her beauty. And I love this moment. Like, it makes sense from Lars, but even Sadie's like starstruck. And I love this great moment where she's like, just take the donuts and take them for free. And they're like, oh damn, Sadie, all right, like, damn, all right, Sadie, I feel ya. And then when she's leaving, she has this amazing line where she's like, it's not really a good business practice. And they're just so amazed by her. It's incredible. And then of course we have a scene where she goes to a club and everything's all good. But then we start to explore something else with fusion, that you start to kind of lose your sense of self. And even though, like, together your love and your feelings can all come together. So can your anxieties. And Steven and Connie both feel that in Stevonnie when they're in the club and everyone's staring at them, and they're like, everyone's staring at me, and they're feeling this like anxiety, having like almost an anxiety attack, and they're like, what do we do? What do I do? And it's like they work through it together, but they still have like this anxiety sort of coming together. And then of course we get introduced to Kevin. Stevonnie has this great badass moment where she's like, get the fuck out of here. She infuses the 2 kids, and Kevin's like, 2 kids, peace, and fucking dips. Yeah, this just like the previous episode, Warped Tour. This episode, it's 11 minutes, but it feels so well paced and written. So much happens in this. Like, it's such a solid episode. I adore this episode. I love the themes it introduces. I think it introduces some of the most important concepts and elements of the entire show. And yeah, I love it a lot. Now this episode, in my opinion, although it's not in the top 5 or anything, it's up there though. You know, it's up there. But this episode, in my opinion, is the most underrated episode of Steven Universe. I love this episode. And it doesn't maybe have all the lore, all the excitement, all the intrigue that a lot of other episodes have. It doesn't really even introduce a concept. I love this episode for one reason, and it's because this episode really starts to explore the Crystal Gems' characters, and it does so much right. So this episode, The Test, Steven sort of learns that that Crystal Gems sort of previously tested him before without telling him, so he demands a new test. They give him one, and he starts going through all these like challenging little parts until he realizes it's fake. And he immediately says, you know, I'm going to... He kind of like ends up seeing the Crystal Gems like he's pissed off, and we see them talk, and they're like, what are we going to do? Like, they're like talking to each other, and this is one of my favorite scenes in the whole show. They're talking to each other, and they're like, what do we do? What are we doing? Right? It's like, well, we're doing this to give Steven confidence. We want to... He's lost his healing powers. Like, he needs this. He really needs this confidence. And they're like, we don't know what we're doing. And they're like, what do you mean? And like, we just don't know what we're doing. Like, we have no clue. It really shows the Crystal Gems have no fucking idea what they're doing. They do not know how to raise a kid. They're not parents. They're aliens. This is so foreign to them, right? They really do not know what they are doing. And there's this moment of like, wow, like up to this point in the show that they seem so confident, so put together, and so like, you know, this dynamic. They know exactly what they're doing. But this is the first point where we see like, they really don't. You know, they really don't. And Steven, with anger on his face, walks through the test, gets to the end, and we think he's going to confront them. But instead, we learn Steven, beautiful soul. Because he fakes that he went through it, and he does it to make them happy. And he does it because he realizes they really care for me. They're doing this for me, and even if it's fake, even if maybe this doesn't really help me, I want to help them. Because they did this test to help Steven get confidence. But in the end, Steven pretends he did it to give them confidence, to make them feel like they do know what they're doing, and they are doing a good job raising Steven, and that he loves them. And it's a great moment. Also, there's a Neon Genesis Evangelion reference. Congratulations with the clapping. I love that. But yes, I love this episode a lot. It does so much so well. I think it is very emotional, packed, emotionally mature. I love the themes in this episode, and I think it's great. This episode really is vastly underrated. It is really like, I really love this episode. Oh boy, time to get emotional. This one is definitely my favorite of the Lion series, I guess you could say. And in it, it starts off as kind of a silly episode where Lion's kind of goofing around, and Steven then learns, oh, I can go inside of Lion. There's some funny bits with like Pearl watching him sleep and all this fun little stuff, but eventually Steven goes inside and sees all this Rose's stuff and sees all this stuff, and we're like, what is this? What is this? And we see him discover the tape, and that's when we get into it. He goes back to Sadie to play the tape, and we see the video of Rose. This is just a beautiful moment, emotional moment, and it's perfect that Steven experiences it with Sadie. I actually don't think there's many other characters. I mean, maybe Connie, but I think it was such a great idea to have him experience that with Sadie. Because earlier in the episode, we see Sadie be like, I tell my mom not to pack me lunches, you can have one. It embarrasses me. But by the end of the video, after Sadie sees how lucky she is to have a mom, and how Steven is. I love how the episode ends by her calling her mom and says, you know those lunches that you made me, or you know how I told you not to pack me lunches anymore. She then starts to appreciate her mom more, and it's such a loving, caring moment. And I just really love how the video is just so beautiful, and it really it's the first time Steven sees Rose. It really makes him happy. It's just a beautiful, loving connection moment, and it's just so emotional. And I love at the end of the video how when he walks out, he gives Lars the classic tap on the chest. Yeah. This episode's so emotional. I don't want to say I cry every time I see this episode, but I would be lying if I said I didn't. This episode gets me emotional every time I watch it. I love it. I think it's handled so well, and yeah, I think it's just a perfectly written episode. So Reunited. This is one of the big episodes of the show. I've actually talked about this video on my YouTube channel before, and it's a 30-minute episode. And I could really dive into the events, what happens here. To sum it up, Garnet has a wedding, the Diamonds come back, they have this interaction, and then they have this moment at the end where they connect. I could go through all of it, but really I still have a lot of episodes to get to. I love this episode. I think this has probably one of my favorite songs in the whole show. Opening up, the wedding between Ruby and Sapphire, beautiful. I love everyone coming together to fight Blue Diamond. That's a great sequence. And even the episode ending in the sort of dreamscape, I think is perfect. Once again, showing off Steven's powers and how he has the pink aura. I love it. This episode's great. It's a really great standalone episode. It is one of the last episodes of the whole show, and it just is everything it needs to be. And I think I love the music, I love the style, the animation's really good, and yeah, it just is. This is one of the most, maybe besides the finale, this is one of the biggest scale episodes of the entire show, and I love it. That's really all I can say. I like it a lot. It's really, really good. The next episode on my list is Mindful Education, and talking about good songs, this probably has, if not my favorite, one of my favorite songs in the entire show. And this is an episode that just is exploring anxiety. Exploring. It's like a therapy episode almost. But I really like how this episode starts off, because it starts off with Connie has the issues, right? And we see how when Steven and Connie fuse, they can't work together because they're not in sync because of Connie's issues. And Garnet sits down with them and tells you how you deal with the issues. And the advice is perfect for children. It's perfect for everyone, really, to say, you have to breathe, and you have to accept it's just a thought. Everything that you're feeling about yourself, you need to learn how to accept yourself and accept your thoughts for how they are, and to love yourself. It's such a beautiful moment, beautifully animated. There's a guest animator on the show. He's a phenomenal animator. I can't think of his name, but he's great. So the animation, this is probably the best looking animated episode of the whole show, and I just loved that sequence, the whole song, and I love how it gets flipped. Because we see Stevani's anxieties stem from how she hurt someone and how she feels so bad about it. But then at the end of it, when they're fused and they're fighting, we then explore Steven's anxieties. And all the PTSD he's dealt with how he tried to help Jasper, but she wouldn't accept it. Or how she tried to help Bismuth, but wouldn't accept it. Or Eyeball. And how all that's catching up, and then we see this beautiful imagery of all the butterflies forming Rose's face, and how she's like, I don't even know what to think. He's like, I don't even know what to think about you anymore. You shattered. Apparently shattered Pink Diamond. Like, who are you? You did all this stuff to Bismuth, and I don't know who to think of you. I don't know what to think of you anymore. And then he has this moment where he just can't deal with it, and it's such a good flip. And obviously they come together at the end, and in the field, and they lie in the field. Beautiful episode. Just a beautiful, probably the most beautiful episode in the entire show. I love the messaging of the show, the thematic elements of this episode, rather, I should say. This is just, it's beautiful, it's amazing, it's incredible, and I love it. This one is actually really close in the ranking to Mindful Education. I kind of went back and forth on which one to put up above the other one, but while I think Mindful Education is the most beautiful episode of the show, one of the most beautiful episodes of the show, this episode is one that makes me feel very good inside. Last one at a beach city. It's a very simple concept. Again, it's a Pearl episode, so I'm gonna like it. So we see Pearl, Amethyst, and Steven let's go to this rock show, and we kind of start to see how Pearl's like living like on like the rebel life. Like she's like, I am a rebel. I can't really explain it, but it's just like a great interaction between the characters. We have this great moment where she sees this girl, and she's like almost like infatuated by her and tries to get her number, but she fumbles the cups everywhere, and she's like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is not like, I don't know what I'm doing. And there's this great moment where in the car, and then they're like, can we just talk about how she looked like Rose? And they're all like, it's so awkward. It's like, oh boy, ooh, and Pearl's like, uh-oh, and it's like so awkward. But then they all get along in the end. They all make it to the show. Pearl asks for the number. It's so simple. This episode isn't really like, again, it's not like a grand episode, but I just love Pearl. I love fleshing out her character, developing her more, exploring her. And it's just such a simple episode, but I just love it a lot. I fucking love this episode. The next episode comes during the Homeworld arc, Off Colors. This is a phenomenal episode. Steven and Lars are in this like kind of like almost like kindergarten sort of on Homeworld where gems are formed. And while they're exploring it, they find these off colors living down there. Gems that just don't fit in the class system. Whether it's because they're fusions that aren't accepted, whether it's because they don't do the role they're functioning, and how there's literally robots trying to shatter them because they just don't fit the class system. Obviously how just horrible that is. Steven and Lars are down there, and this is a great Lars episode. Lars has it's been building up for like a lot of episodes now, but Lars finally has his moment where he helps the off colors, he stands up for them, and he fights with them, and then he dies. And then he fucking dies. And it's like one of the most beautiful moments in the entire show, and one of the most tragic moments in the entire show. And we see Steven, obviously cry over his body, and then brings him back to life, turning him pink. And you're just like, what the fuck? And boom, that's the episode. It's so perfect. It's so well written. It fits into the arc perfectly. It is almost like the redemption of Lars. Not that Lars was necessarily a bad person and needed to be redeemed, but it's the moment where Lars kind of breaks out of his character flaw of being kind of like having a hard time sitting up people and caring too much about his image. He throws that all away. And it's just a phenomenal episode. Yes. I just love this episode a lot. Plus the off colors are cool. They're cute. They're fun. So some of you might be surprised by this. We obviously are getting to the end of our list. We only have a few more episodes left after this, but some of you may be surprised to see a Jailbreak this low. A lot of people consider this to be one of the, if not the best episode of the entire series. And yes, it's this high. Obviously, I think it's a great episode, but I don't think it's one of the best. Not to say it's not amazing, because it is, and at one point, I mean, looking at this right now, it would have been, when it came out, it would have been at the very least in the top 3 or 4. But yes, I like this episode a lot. Obviously, this is the episode we reveal Garret's fusion. I just love the structure of this episode. We get introduced to Ruby, then we get introduced to Sapphire, and then we see them fuse together to make Garnet. Stronger Than You is one of the best songs in the entire show. I don't need to tell you that. You know that, right? If you watch the show, you know this, so it's not like you're like shocked by this. You know it, of course. And Garnet has this amazing badass moment, this amazing song about love, about strength, about being there for each other, and the representation behind it, and the thematic moment, the symbolism behind it, and how, Jasper's like, how you just stop turning into that disgusting thing. And this isn't really how the show, it isn't like in the universe, but it definitely is representation of LGBT relationships. Or you know what I mean? And we see how they come together to create this beautiful bond that they won't let, I guess you could say, bigots like Jasper shut down. And it's beautiful, amazing anthem of power, about love, about unity, and about, maybe you can try to tear me down, but in the end, who I am, I'm stronger than you, right? And not just physically, like I'm just a stronger person than you. And yeah, it's an epic episode. This first episode's like kind of intense, insane. All the shit's going down. And then, of course, it ends with the fusion at the end. But yeah, look, I just love this episode. It's amazing. You all know that. It is one of the best in the entire show. And for that, gotta love it. Speaking of episodes with amazing songs, amazing moments, and emotional moments, and hey, guess what? It's a Pearl episode. Are you shocked? Sworn to the Sword, baby. I love this one. I love how this episode almost breaks gender roles right off the bat by saying, hey, it's time to train with a sword. But not Steven, not the male character. We're going to give it to the female character, Connie. And I love that choice. It's such a good choice. Steven has the shield, Connie has the sword, and it's perfect. It's a perfect choice, and it definitely breaks sort of gender roles and like the stereotypical sort of male and female sort of dynamic in shows, because usually it'd be the male with the sword attacking and the female with the shield defending. But swapping it, I think, not only it isn't something that like they do and it feels like, oh, this doesn't make any sense. It makes sense for their characters and it works so perfectly. But then, of course, we get the moment where this is a Pearl episode. Pearl starts training Connie and saying, you're worthless. Your whole purpose is to defend Steven. And obviously, this is through the song, we see how this is her projecting this on the Connie, how she feels. How she felt like she was useless and her whole life purpose was to help Rose Quartz out, no matter how much Rose didn't want her to do it. And now she's projecting that on the Connie in a very unhealthy manner that makes Steven very uncomfortable, because Connie's adapting this mentality that I'm useless, I'm not worth anything, my whole life's purpose is to help Steven. And Steven's just like, I'm not comfortable with this. And at the end has this moment where he teams up with Connie and says, we're doing this together. And Pearl just can't take it anymore. And she's like, why? This Freudian slip, which is like, why won't you let me do this for you, Rose? And it just like echoes. And you're like, holy fucking shit. Like, that is, my hair's a goddamn mess now, but that's fucking deep as shit. She literally is like, we see how she like she wanted to do this for Rose, and Rose wouldn't let her do it because she wants just wants to feel that for Rose, and now she's projected on the Connie, and it just is too much for her. In this moment at the end where she's sitting down and she's just like, you know, Steven and Connie, even Connie's like, did Rose make you feel bad? And she's like, no, Rose made me feel like I was everything, like she was amazing, and she made me feel so good about myself. And that's when you realize the unhealthy relationship she had with Rose, and the unhealthy obsession she had with Rose, and how that really is her biggest character flaw. And this episode is just so beautiful. I love it. It's emotional. I cry every time I watch this episode. I think this is an episode that like, that Pearl, I think, was being fleshed out a lot in the show at this point, but this is the episode that like advances her character development even further and really shows the real true nature of her relationship with Rose. And I think it's perfect to represent that through Connie and Steven. Yeah, so I just love this episode. I think it's one of my favorites. And now the big one. This one's a little controversial, and some of you may be surprised to see it this high, and guess what? It's a Pearl episode. Kind of. But A Single Pale Rose, a lot of people really didn't like this. Or maybe not. Okay. I've heard some people voice their dissatisfaction with the twist that Rose is Pink Diamond, but it makes so much sense, and I'm not going to explain why it does now because, damn, this video's long. I gotta finish this shit. But basically, my point is I fucking love this episode. I think it is perfect. I think it reveals the twist in a perfect manner, and going inside Pearl's psyche, and we see how she literally, her as a character, how she's so organized and like she literally, how she organizes things, and you know, like contains things, right? And we see the deeper we go into her psyche, how less contained it is, and how more chaotic it is, and how we see how her sort of fucked up memories, how the things that she suppresses, if you will. How like, oh, that scene where she's like, well, I can't believe Rose is having a baby. And then Steven's like, this is awkward. Then we see her war memories, and we finally see the thing she's been suppressing the most, the secret. And it's a great sequence, the beautifully animated sequence. I love... We see how Pink Diamond tells Pearl, you can't tell anyone this, and how that's why it's so suppressed, and that's why she's always covers her mouth when Pink Diamond gets mentioned, and Rose and their connection. But just in general, this episode's great. It's perfectly well paced. I think it does everything it needs to do. And yeah, I love it. So this episode is phenomenal. On the Run. This is an Amethyst episode. I think this is the best Amethyst episode, and I think this is the first episode where we really flesh out Amethyst as a character. We see at the beginning how Pearl's kind of like talking about Homeworld and how they did all this terrible stuff and made these terrible things, and we see how Amethyst is just kind of like offended by it and how she's kind of feels terrible about it. She kind of feels like who she is a mistake. And then we see where Steven's like, let's go on the run because I read this cute little book and I want to like go pretend like I have no home. And Amethyst's like, yeah, I'm on board. And at first you think it's just because she's silly and goofy, but then you realize it's because she kind of feels like she doesn't have a home, right? Like Homeworld's not her home. She's never been there. And then the Earth is kind of her home, but the kindergarten is also her home. Like she has a really like hard time conflicting. Of course, she then shows Steven the kindergarten. Pearl shows up and we get this amazing sequence, this battle sequence, this emotional just dump where Amethyst is like, I'm not going to let you make me feel bad for everything I hate about myself, because this is what I hate about myself. And this is like my whole existence, and you make me hate myself for it. And then Pearl has this amazing moment where she's like, I never thought of this place as you. They have an amazing connection, bonding moment. I cry every time this comes on. This is that sequence comes on. It's just so emotional. It's so heavy. It gives Amethyst so much weight and character, and we see her throughout the series through her own arc and through other episodes where we see her have self-worth issues and her overcoming those. And this is the first time we really introduce it and why and what she is a product of. And it's awesome. I love the song in this episode. I love this episode overall. This is one of my favorites. Bismuth. Oh, Bismuth. This is the first 30-minute episode. This is actually the 100th episode of the entire show. And I love this episode because what it introduces. Bismuth is a cool character, yeah, but I love what she represents in this episode. I think they do such a good job. She represents sort of an alternative way of dealing with the diamonds. She's way more aggressive than the other crystal gems, and we can see why her aggressive nature would clash with Rose Quartz, especially after finding out she's Pink Diamond. It makes even more sense. And this is where they're all kind of like this amazing moment where they're all kind of like getting along with Bismuth, and they're kind of like everyone's getting together until at the very end where she reveals her plans to share the diamonds. Steven's like, I can't accept it, and Bismuth just kind of has this confused moment where she's like, it really is you, Rose, isn't it? And Steven's like, what the fuck? It has to confront her on her ideologies. And I mean, listen, the show may be arguing that Steven's way is right and Bismuth's way is wrong, and I can see why a lot of people would interpret it that way, but I almost interpret it as maybe both sides have a point. I don't think one way is the objective right way, even if the show maybe presents that Steven's way is the right way. But what I really like about this is I feel like it's just Bismuth's aggressiveness and her sort of character that is really off-putting in a way to Steven, and in a way that sort of Steven just doesn't feel right about it, and they conflict with each other, and it's Bismuth's way of dealing with it that ultimately her pride and her like I'm a crystal gem sort of deal with that. And what I, again just really like about this episode is, and of course we had the emotional moment where she's like, you didn't even tell your friends that you bubbled me, like how could you do this to me? And he's like, all right, I will do that for you. And then she's like, at least you're better than her. And that's like, holy shit. But what I really love about this episode is they introduce Bismuth, and she's like, oh, I'm a crystal gem, and it's like, holy shit, like this. And she's even naming them off. She's like, where's Biggs, and where's these, and where's all these guys? And they're all like, ooh. And that's where we're like, holy shit, they're really, how the crystal gems have really dwindled. And this moment where Bismuth is like, this is what we are now, this is who we are, this is what we have left. And I really like how she's like, I'm a crystal gem, I'm proud, but we've never seen her before, so we almost view her in Steven's perspective as alien and not really a crystal gem, even though she is, but the crystal gems are so different now, what they are, used to be. Yeah, it's great though. It's great. I love this episode a lot. It's a good one. So some of you may be shocked to see this episode very high, because I actually have voiced a lot of my problems I have with Change Your Mind. I think this episode is paced pretty poorly. I think it has some writing issues, but it's the final episode of the show. It's basically broke up into 4 sections. We see some new fusions. It's all great. And all that stuff before like the last 15 minutes are all great. I love it. But it really is the last 15 minutes of this episode that puts it this high. And I think it has the best scene in the entire show. And that's all I'm going to talk about is that one scene. Because I could talk about the songs in the end, and I could talk about the little sequence in the end, and how Steven just wants to change your mind. All of the thematic elements of Steven having a PTSD-riddled experience, and how he is having this identity crisis of, I'm supposed to be Rose Quartz, but I'm also supposed to be Pink Diamond, but I'm Steven, and it's just kind of all fucked up. But what I really love is that sequence at the end. Where White Diamond is pointing out all the flaws in everyone, and then pulls out the gem from Steven, and we see Pink Steven. And there's this moment of realization where we're like, wow, like Rose Quartz, Pink Diamond is really gone. This gem almost is a new person. Like gems can now be new people. They really are gone. Of course, Pink Steven has that moment where he yells, "They're gone," and gives chills down my spine. But we see obviously Steven and his pink self come together, and it's kind of almost revealed that he's kind of a fusion in a way. And they fuse together in this amazingly animated scene by James Baxter, who's an incredible animator, work on Adventure Time. He has a character in Adventure Time, the horse. But listen, this episode is easily that scene is easily one of the most beautiful scenes in the whole show, in all of television. And I love some of the thematic elements of this episode. And yes, while I do have some problems with it, this is easily the most intense, epic, and insane episode of the whole show. We see all these new fusions, we see Obsidian, we see all these characters have their moments, get new outfits. It really is what I want a finale to be. And that ending is just, I love it. I love it. I believe The Trial is probably the best written episode of the entire show. This is obviously in the trial arc, I guess you could say. This is my favorite episode in that arc. And one of my favorite episodes in the entire show. And we see basically Steven on trial for his mother being, in this case, Rose Quartz crimes against the Diamonds. I love the Zircons, by the way. They're great. They're humorous. They had a great foil to this episode. But we see Steven almost, he's just had enough with dealing with Mother's problems, and he almost just wants to take the responsibility of it. And we also have moments in the show this episode where they're sort of revealing, like, how was it really Pink Diamond, or rather was it really Rose who shared Pink Diamond? And we have this moment where the Zircon calls out the Diamonds, and they're like, maybe it was you. And it's like, holy shit, why did you say that? But we see like the Diamonds' different approaches. Yellow Diamond just wants to fucking get rid of Steven, just end it. But Blue wants to hear it out because she wants questions answered. She still has questions she wants to be answered. And I, not only raising those questions are interesting, but I love how Steven he tries to take the blame for it, but he obviously didn't do it. He obviously wasn't there, but it just is a perfect representation of how the burden he has to deal with being Rose Quartz or having her gem. And I think it's, it's great. It's a very well written episode. It's very compact. There's everything it needs to do. And it's intense. You're sweating the whole time. And yeah, it's a phenomenal episode for sure. We're getting to the end, ladies and gentlemen. We're almost there. The next one is Mr. Greg. And you want to talk about amazing songs? This whole episode is that. It's a musical. Obviously, it has It's Over, Isn't It? Which is probably one of the best songs in the whole show. Oh, wait. Oh, it's a Pearl episode. Are you shocked? But it's a great song. I think Both of You is a great song. But exploring the Greg and Pearl dynamic, their character relationship in this episode, I think it's such a smart way to do it. It's one of the most interesting ones because it's literally in the song we see how Pearl literally feels useless and how she doesn't know her purpose anymore because her whole purpose was Rose, and how she kind of feels like Greg just swooped in and took her from her, even though Rose wasn't really hers, right? It just feels so sad and emotional. and we see how Steven brings them together. And it's just a beautiful episode. Amazing songs, animation's great. It's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. And I love Pearl's whole, issues, flaws, if you will, and how this episode almost embraces those flaws and embraces her for who she is, and embraces almost like shows how her and Greg, how they had a falling out and bringing them back together. It's just a beautiful episode. I think it's a solid episode. Just like some of the episodes I talked about recently, it's like incredible how like paced this episode is. Like it's 11 minutes, but it feels like it's way longer. Like it's so compact. Like there's never a dull moment in this entire episode. It goes from right to the beginning to end. It's perfectly paced, perfectly written. It's one of the best. So some of you may be shocked to see this episode so high, or these episodes so high. Once again, I am counting these episodes as one episode because I think they're kind of both interconnected. And I think, in my opinion, this episode is the first really, really good episode of the show, being Mirror Gem and Ocean Gem. And here's why. So, this episode's Ocean Gem, or Mirror Gem rather, starts off very simply. Steven gets a little mirror. He starts playing with it. It's kind of a cute episode until he realizes the mirror exists on his own. Or exists on its own, I should say. Yeah, exists on its own. And it starts talking to Steven. And he shows the crystal gems, and they're horrified. And it's the first moment in the show you realize they don't even know what's going on. They don't know what they're doing. And in panic, Garnet's like, give it to me. And Steven has this conflicted moment where he's like, should I help this gem or listen to the crystal gems, or the mirror rather? And he ultimately decides to help the mirror, pissing off Garnet, having that horrifying scene where he knocks off her glasses and she's just staring at him. Frees the gem, Lapis comes out. It's a great introductory moment. She steals the ocean. Cut to the next episode. This episode's Ocean, it's amazing. Because I think this episode's, while yes, introducing Lapis is great, and they have some amazing moments, like with the shield and the fighting the clones, and this incredible moment, Steven healing the gem, all these amazing moments in the show, the ocean coming back and everyone hugging Steven and embracing him. It's great. It's great. But I think, what we learned in this episode is what's more interesting. On the car ride there, Steven says, gems shouldn't fight other gems, and Pearl kind of reveals to him, we've been doing that this entire time. We've been fighting corrupted gems this entire time. We've been doing that. And gems have kind of always been fighting other gems. It's not that simple. And that's the first time we're like, whoa, like that's a pretty big deal, right? And then, of course, at the end, we have this moment between Pearl and Garnet where they're sitting there and they go, what are we going to do? Like, Homeworld, there's still gems out there. Like, what are we going to do? And they're like, you know what? We'll just have to wait and see. But I think this episode is amazing. I think the first episode, Mirror Gem, I maybe put a little bit higher than Ocean Gem just because I love the basic concept of it. But at the end, I love both these episodes and the thematic elements in them, introducing Lapis, and Steven starts to really explore that the crystals maybe don't know what the fuck they're doing, and there's secrets and weird shit that they're hiding from Steven, and kind of some dark stuff going on. And Lapis is a representation of that. We have the beautiful moment in space where he heals her gem. I love these two episodes. They're literally some of my favorite in the entire show. Actually, they kind of are my favorite in the entire show. Well, except for one episode. Yeah. We have only one episode left. I have talked about every single episode of Steven Universe. It has only taken, at this point, about 3.5 hours of recording and 3 different days of recording. But I am now going to talk about, I think, my favorite episode of Steven Universe. Are you shocked? It's a Pearl episode. Are you really that shocked? And it's the best Pearl episode. Rose's Scabbard. I adore this episode because this is the first episode where we really start to explore Pearl's main character arc. Her main character, who she is, her self-conscious sort of insecurities, and her relationship with Rose Quartz, and how that shapes and affects who she is. We see her. Should I even summarize this whole episode? I guess I should. I guess I will. What I love about this episode is Pearl is trying to sort of finds the scabbard. Pearl is in like, I want to educate Steven on everything, and then her learning that Steven knows some stuff that she wanted to share with him, and maybe he knows stuff that even she didn't know. That, hey, Lion is connected to Rose, but Pearl didn't know that, because if Rose had a lion, she would tell her about it, except she did keep secrets from everyone. But Pearl can accept that, obviously, because she knows the biggest secret of all. She knows that Rose Quartz is Pink Diamond, and she knows many more secrets. But then she feels like almost like betrayed, and almost like she almost like gets toxic and starts like telling the Crystal Gems like, you don't know her like I know her. And they're all like, well, we miss her too. Like, our feelings are valid too. And she's like, no, they're not. Like, I miss her more than anyone. She gets really upset. This horrifying, tragic moment where Steven's like, well, maybe you just don't know what's going on. And Pearl just lashes out. How would you even know? You never even met her. Man, Steven, like, this kid is going through so much, man. Like, he just can't deal with it. He's such a strong fucking boy. Good for this fucking girl. Pearl runs away. He confronts her. She leaves. She's hanging out. He goes to jump to her. She's on this island. And she looks back at him with almost disgust. And that's when he realizes, in a weird way, Pearl blames me for Rose not being around anymore. It's some pretty heavy shit to deal with. He then talks to her in the end. She has this incredible sequence where she's speaking to Rose, a hologram version of Rose. Shares this conversation. And that's when we also reveal that, yeah, Pearl was in love with Rose Quartz. This is the first episode where we're really like, yeah, like, not only does Pearl kind of Pearl blame Steven for Rose Quartz being around, but she was in love with his mom. Some awkward things to deal with. Some pretty heavy stuff to deal with. And we have this moment where she connects with Rose Quartz. She explains the connections, and she goes, what would she think of me now? Like, I don't know what to do without her. I don't know who I am without her. My whole life was to live with her. And now that she's gone, I don't know what I am. Like, I'm nothing. Like, what would she think of me? And Steven says the perfect line. He says, well, I think you're pretty great. I'm trying not to tear up right now, but every time I see that scene, this episode, I become a wreck. I become an emotional goddamn wreck, because it symbolizes everything. It's so perfect. Steven's like, I don't know who my mom is. I don't know about any of this stuff. I can't control this. I'm just born into this. But what I know is that I do think you're awesome. I do love you, and I appreciate you. And that's a moment where Pearl says like, wow, like, she's like, wow, like, whew. She's like, just can't handle it. And they have this amazing bonding moment where they're talking about, he's telling about with this amazing music. Pearl's telling Steven about the war and all this stuff. And then we see they pull out the flag and they're on the line. They have this great bonding moment. And yeah, for me, this is the best episode of the entire show, because I think Pearl is the best written character in the show. Maybe besides Steven, but Steven's the most fleshed out. But I think Pearl is the most interesting gem. I think she has the most interesting character dynamics. And this episode is just perfect, I think, in almost every single way. I love how it's delivered. I love how we explore all these just horrifying, deep, emotional aspects of Pearl and the Crystal Gems and their relationship and Rose and how Steven's position in all of it. And it's such a deep, emotional, heartfelt episode, and honestly, one of the best. Whenever I've watched this show with some people before, and every time we get to this episode, I kind of sigh and I go, here we go, get ready. I love this episode. It is my favorite in the entire show, and I've accepted that. So yeah, there we go. So that's it. All of my episodes ranked. Steven Universe. This episode, wow, I can't even speak anymore. I'm just used to saying that's this video. That was a Freudian slip right there. This video took a long time to do, a long time to record, and I haven't even started editing this yet. I hope to release this actually on the day Steven Universe ends, and hopefully I did that. Hopefully the show didn't already end. I'm hoping maybe. I've been actually struggling lately with my own sort of mental health, and I've been getting help with it. And Steven Universe has changed me as a person. It kind of helped me accept me for who I am, and kind of told me it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to show your weaknesses. It's okay to be who you are. And that means so much to me. And right now I've been going through a lot. So making this video almost feels like a sense of therapy for me. And in many ways, I kind of want to show my thanks for this show and show my appreciation for this show. And I just hope that I get my shit together and I can actually editing, because I've been having such a hard time editing lately because I felt I've been going through a depressive phase, and it's been kind of hard for me to be motivated to do work and to do episodes, but I hope maybe I really do get this done and this comes out the day Steven Universe ends, so I can thank the show for what it did and express to you guys how much I really love this show and rank every single episode of the show. So much work went into this, so please consider subscribing, liking my stuff. I'm sorry maybe that watching this video there were as many episode clips or as many images you would like, but I just don't think I'd have the time to do that. I'm recording this in very early March, and I hope to have this out again by the end of March, so please be aware of that. This episode probably took a very long time to edit, and I can tell you it took a very long time to record. It took a long time to rake and write these episodes, so please consider supporting me, following me on Twitch, following me on YouTube, watching my stuff. I am always live to talk to you guys about stuff you want talked about, and of course Steven Universe, you can always come by. I'm always on Minecraft, for example, using the Peridot skin. I love this show. It means so much to me. Tell me what you guys think in the comments. Tell me below some of your favorite episodes. Rank them all if you want. Rank your top 10. Comment on which episode you think I ranked maybe a higher than you would or lower than you would. I don't know, but let's talk about it. Either way, I thank Steven Universe for helping me become who I am, and I want to thank all of you for helping me become who I am, watching my videos. It means the world to me. I love you guys, and until the next video, something. I don't have a final line to say. Just, yeah. We're all in this together, baby. See you later.